Can you start the recording? Okay, that clock's slow.
44 people on Zoom.
45 right now. So it is 7:01, May 31st, 2022. I call this meeting the Wellfleet Selectboard to order. And if, hello?
Yeah.
Have you guys got the audio good? All right. All right. So the first item on our agenda is open session, public comments. Announcements, public comments must be brief and the board will not deliberate or vote on any matter raised solely during announcements and public comments. I know that Chief Hurley has one. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. I just asked the chair if I could take a few minutes this evening just to reassure the community. In the past week, I've had quite a few conversations with school officials, school committee, parents about the events that unfolded in Texas. And even this past Friday at Monomoy Regional High School with the bomb threat, which in that situation, my son goes there, and I transitioned from a cop and a police chief to a parent very quickly. My first reaction was to go there, and the police part of me said, stay away, let them do their job. So the message tonight is your police department is well-trained. We are trained an active shooter to deal with the issue head-on immediately, whether it's one team, two teams, one officer, three officers. And just rest assured that any event that happens in the community that we will be responding and dealing with it immediately. But if anybody has any questions or concerns still, please reach out and this dialogue will continue on. I don't have all the answers, but we have to keep our community safe, and I just want the community to feel that way. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Are there any others? Okay. Seeing none. Onto the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
can we please have item B, which is the application for the Shellfish Advisory Committee pulled out so we can deal with it separately?
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other objections to the consent agenda? Okay, so I move to approve the consent or item A, the consent agenda.
Helen, second.
Can I have a roll call vote?
John, I.
Michael, I.
Barbara, I.
Brian, I.
Helen, I.
Okay, item B, the application of Karen Johnson to the Shellfish Advisory, Shellfish Advisory Board. Ms. Wilson?
Yes, so what these newer members of the board have not experienced as much as I have, although maybe Mike has a little bit, is when we have two applicants for the same position, even though one of them got his, application in a tiny bit late, we wait and do it on the same night to be fair. And I did confirm today, although it's not in our applications, that both applicants, Karen Johnson and Nick Saruchek, both wish to be regulars. Right now on the Shellfish Committee, the Shellfish Advisory Board, there are two positions open. One is for a regular and one is for an alternate. So once again, both applicants, and they are to be thanked for wanting to serve, have applied for the same thing. So I think that what we should do, because it really has been normal in the past, Janet started it or she kept it up and it proved to be a very kind of fair way of doing it, is to have that appointment made when both candidates are present, just to wait till the next meeting. I may not be on. Thank you.
Mr. Wolf?
Yeah, I feel quite strongly that Ms. Johnson got her application in a timely fashion. I feel it would, I don't see any reason to wait. The second application came in when? Just in the last couple of days. I think it would be reasonable and fair. I see no advantage to waiting until the next meeting to consider these applications. I think we should consider and discuss and vote on Karen Johnson's application now.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I mean, I think that we don't just appoint these positions based on, who applied first. If people applied prior to the meeting, he thought he was going to be on this meeting. So I just think it's fair to do them at the same time. We've done that in the past.
Sure.
1 second. So in this case, there is one board seat and one alternate seat. So there's 2 vacant positions for these applicants. So I would like to move this tonight. It's very common that the alternates of the SAB vote vote in their meetings. It's based on people's work schedules, it's not always feasible for all the full members of the board to attend every single meeting. So it's very common. It's a 7-member board for 1 or 2 of them to be absent. So I'd like to move on it tonight. But I will defer to the will of the board. John?
Yes. My feeling about the second application is that if he wanted to be on this meeting tonight, he should have gotten his application in time to be on the meeting tonight. Ms. Johnson applied for a position on the board, not as a position as alternate. And I think we should vote on it on that basis.
Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, just to add a little background information. In the past, I've been on this board when applications have come in over a month. And you've got to remember, one of the most important things we do is appoint people to boards and committees. And in fact, not that often does an alternate get to vote. I was an alternate for like 7 years on the Shellfish Committee. And you get to participate and it's good. And both applicants are great. One of them has more experience with the wild fishery, but to do our job well and to do it in a way that is a time-tried method for applicants who want the same position, I think we should wait. And it isn't that much longer.
Ms. Johnson? Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate your consideration. I didn't know there was going to be a bake-off when I applied for Shellfish Advisory. I've been a shellfisherman, commercial shellfisherman for over 7 years. I have a lot of experience that I think I can bring to the table. Experience that I think many other candidates can't bring to the table, in that I've worked as a shellfisherman in multiple towns. I've worked on grants in Dennis, Provincetown, Barnstable, Wellfleet, Yarmouth. I've worked in a hatchery for 3 years. I've worked both in deep water grants and onshore grants. I've farmed oysters, a couple types of clams, scallops, and now I mostly focus on the wild fishery. So I've done grant work, I've done wild fishery work. If there's some reason you find I'm not qualified to be on the board, I understand. What I think it should be, based on the fact that I am qualified, it should be in the order that the application is received. It's just my opinion.
So what does the board wish to do tonight?
I would wish to vote on it tonight.
Yep. Barbara?
I would as well.
Okay. Mike, you're probably recused from this, right?
I don't think I have to be, but I'll just abstain from voting.
Okay.
This doesn't.
No, I don't have to be recused. No financial
Okay.
interest, and
Yeah.
it's advisory.
Okay.
So
So it's up to you if you vote or not. So I move to appoint Karen Johnson to the Shellfish Advisory Board for a term ending June 30th, 2025. And what's the end part of your typical one?
And part? Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
it's written down here.
Well,
just-
I, drafted that carefully, and as a regular member,
No,
right, you have to put that in there.
yeah,
And
Sorry,
to
that's
serve, in compliance with all state and local regulations and bylaws and the town charter.
okay, so moved.
Second, John second.
Okay, kind of roll call vote, please.
Quickly, just for discussion purposes, these applications only came in 3 days apart.
Mhm.
So just so everyone's aware, it's not like, I think Nick's application came in on the 27th or something like that.
Yep.
And Ryan?
Okay,
Yeah.
but I'd like
So-
to.
Yes,
I'll-
I
all
know,
right.
we're discussing right now, but we've already discussed. So both applicants are really great, but for example, what Ms. Johnson just said about herself to, enhance our knowledge of her, that wasn't in the application, so it was good to hear it stated publicly. The other applicant has not had a chance to do that. And once again, you're both going to be on there. One of you will be an alternate, one of you will be a regular, and you're both great. And you both have things to offer, but this is the process that we've used for years, which is why I'm saying this right now, not because there's anything wrong with Ms. Johnson's application or willingness to serve at all. Thank you.
Okay, kind of roll call vote, please.
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Ryan, I.
Michael abstain.
Helen, nay.
Okay, motion carries 3-1. Thank you, Karen. Use of town property, Rebecca Arnoldi. Is Rebecca Arnoldi here?
Yes,
Yes, okay, all
I'm
right,
here
on
virtually.
Zoom, all right.
yeah, sorry about that. I would have loved to have been there present, but I couldn't be.
Oh, no worries. This works fine too. So can you just kind of walk us through what you're proposing here?
Sure, I'm proposing to lead some yoga nature art programs this summer and beyond at some of the public Wellfleet areas, including Newcomb Hollow Beach and Duck Creek area, and possibly others. Those are the two main ones I'm looking to lead programs at.
Okay, you have so would this be happening every week at each of these locations?
Yes, so this would be weekly programs. I'm going to be doing some work for the Wellfleet Rec on Mondays and Wednesdays through most of the summer. So this would be primarily Tuesdays and Thursdays, a morning program and an afternoon program. There might occasionally be a program for an individual or small group booked separately for, say, a Sunday or a late Wednesday, but generally speaking, be Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm trying to make this complementary to already existing programs. So I've been speaking with some of the yoga instructors and someone who leads some nature exploration programs, so I can try to make sure that I'm not stepping on any toes. And so the schedule is a little bit in flux because of that, but basically what I've sent is what I'm planning on doing.
Okay, and you're charging a fee, and how is that structured?
So my plan is to charge $18 if someone is doing a class, like a 1 hour class or 1.5 hours, and 36 if they're doing a full program, which is usually a little over 2 hours, and a pay what you can for anybody who has financial need and isn't able to pay those fees. I don't want to exclude anybody.
Okay, and then it says you'd have between 2 to 10 participants in each of these classes.
Correct. So the maximum would be 10.
Okay, Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, two questions and then a comment. The first question is, for example, in the part of your application, which is BE Body and Earth Adventures, it says free write. Write as in write, write handwriting. What does that mean?
So that means that during the last part of the program, just like 10, 15 minutes, people have the chance to write whatever they're thinking, whatever they're feeling, their responses to the program, to kind of integrate the experience. I'm trying to lead programs to help people reconnect with their bodies and with the earth and basically wherever we are. So for example, at Newcomb Hollow, really connecting deeply with that beach, with that place. I feel that right now, it's been a difficult couple 2 years. I think people really need.
Wait,
Sorry.
Can you get closer to the microphone on your end, Rebecca?
you became inaudible.
Okay, sure.
Now-
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes,
Okay. Is there something you'd like me to?
yes, I then had another, sorry, on the last page of the application for all of us, they're very pinned down details, and there are 4 locations you're requesting. And there's something a little ambiguous, and it doesn't have to be changed in any kind of written form for this. But it says here, Newcomb Hollow outside protected area. And really what that is, having checked with the beach administrator, is that is the area protected by lifeguards. In other words, you can do what you're going to do outside of the area that's protected by lifeguards. So the last thing I wanted to say is there's conditioning and the response from staff. Thank you for working with them. And the motion is going to refer to that very firmly, because there are places staff says you can't do it then, or you can't do it at all there. And anything that we may allow with our motion has to comply with that. The last thing I'm going to say that's the most difficult for me, or perhaps for all of us, is for what you're doing for use of town property, the fees are 110 initially and then 25 a day afterwards. And that would come to, if we charge the 110 on the first day, $2,285, or if we just did it for 88 days, which is the length of time you're applying for, although you might not use all that, it would be $2,200. And that's pretty stiff, considering probably not all of it would be used. But I wanted to put that out there for the board, because I sort of took it apart and did the math and looked at our fee schedule, what this would come under.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is it okay to respond?
Rebecca?
Yeah, so I was not aware of that, of the fees. I was actually curious what they were, and I didn't know that that was the fee system. Given that fee system, what I would like to change my application to be, to have programs on request. I don't know if it's possible to do that, but with those same dates, but
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, I have a suggestion as well as to how to do this.
we've dealt with stuff where there's season-long programs
Yep.
and not have had those set daily charges. So we have discretion to change that.
Yeah, it depends on the programming, but so rather than having the board discuss, I'd actually ask if Suzanne could actually negotiate a fee that she feels is appropriate. So she's nodding yes. Would that satisfy the board? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and Rebecca, does that satisfy you? You just talk to Suzanne and figure out your schedule and then negotiate a fee that you both can agree upon.
sounds good.
Okay,
I have a motion.
Yep.
Yeah.
1 second. John?
I just had a question. There are a couple on the sign-offs by the departments, the department heads. There's a couple of qualifiers, one from the Community Services Director and one from Recreation.
Yep.
I put this in the motion.
Yeah, she already met with them.
Okay.
Spoke to them on the
Yeah.
side. That was just the original application.
Okay,
Okay, okay, yeah. I move that we approve Rebecca Arnoldi's use of town property as specified in her application and conditioned by town departments for a fee that will be established in collaboration with the beach administrator.
okay, second. Oh, Community Services Director.
Community Services Director. Well,
So, second. Can I have a roll call vote?
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Michael, I.
Ryan, I.
Helen, I.
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. Have a good night.
Thank you.
So Herring River Restoration Projects, Ducks Unlimited, Town Match, Miss Ridley.
Good evening, Carol Ridley, Coordinator for the Herring River Restoration Project. And I'm here before the board this evening to ask you to approve signing on to a partner commitment letter for a Ducks Unlimited grant that's been awarded to Ducks Unlimited from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is a $2 million grant that is going to be used primarily for pre-construction vegetation management. Just to provide a little bit of history on this, this grant was applied for, I believe, last July. And at that time, or right about that time, we came to the board requesting the town's participation as a 10% match partner to make the grant proposal more competitive. At that time, you voted, as is indicated in the memo in your packet, to agree to do so. And the match component was a pledge of a portion of a grant from the state Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, for which the town had applied to support the project. At that time, the grant had not been awarded. And we noted that in the event that the grant was not awarded, the MVP grant, there would be other alternatives for the town to meet its match commitment. Subsequently, the MVP award was made, so that grant funding is available. It's a state grant, and so it would count as non-federal match for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service grant to Ducks Unlimited. So I think just about maybe 4, 5, 6 months ago, Sarah Fleming from Ducks Unlimited and I attended a select board meeting to give you an update on the status of the grant. And at that time, we promised to come back to you and have one more conversation about the nature of the match. But now that the grant has formally been awarded to Ducks Unlimited, they will need to execute documents with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they will need confirmation of the match status. So that is the request this evening.
Okay,
And Mr. Chairman, before any discussion, I'm going to abstain from this vote because I have requested but not yet received advice from the State Ethics Commission regarding my ability to participate in matters on the Herring River in Wellfleet because I've handled matters intro relating to the project.
Yep.
Thank you.
thank you. So I have a motion, but if there's any discussion,
Just a question.
Yep.
So I take this to understand that the town of Wellfleet itself is not going to be spending money out of the general fund. It's going to be from this grant.
That is absolutely correct. There's
Okay.
no funding being provided by the town of Wellfleet, either from the MVP grant was completely, a state funded grant. The match was provided by federal grants given to the Herring River project. No monies from the town of Wellfleet for this purpose.
This is primarily for vegetation management.
Required for the construction, correct?
Can everybody hear it when she's using that mic?
No.
Okay. Nancy, can you knock on their door?
Would you like me to go to the other mic?
No, we've got it for you, but I want just so
Brian, the
Yep.
real question is, can the Zoom participants
yeah, that's a
hear?
concern. So
Can we hear from any of them?
yeah, those microphones were an issue last time as well.
Okay,
We can hear.
Okay.
okay.
All right. All right. So I move that the town of Wellfleet will meet its contributed commitment as a 10% match partner for the $2 million grant from Ducks Unlimited from the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, North American Wetland Conservation Act program for the Herring River Restoration Project pledging $200,000 of expended grant funds from the Commonwealth Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Action Grant Program and to authorize the signing of a partner commitment and the provisions of necessary documentation of expended grant funds.
John,
Second,
Okay, can I have a roll call vote, please?
John, I.
Barbara abstain.
Ryan, I.
Michael, I.
Helen, I, but I don't really understand why we needed a motion, but very well.
Okay,
Fine.
so motion carries 4 with 1 abstention. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep,
anybody else that speaks, would you have them speak into this microphone?
okay. So, all right, Adult Community Center retirement letter, it's included in the packet. Are there any questions or comments about it? Yep,
Yeah, this is not a business matter, and I think we should all sign it. And I requested to have there be a copy we could all sign here at the meeting, because this is, Linda Balch has served for a very long time and has helped me and many other people. And so did somebody bring a copy? So we
Yep.
can all sign it tonight?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you're good for like business, but the chair signing this all by himself, not so much.
yeah, I wrote it, so.
It's a good letter, thank you.
All right. So I move to approve the letter as drafted.
Second,
Okay, can I have a roll call vote?
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Michael, I.
Brian, I.
Helen, I.
All right. Rebecca, should I use my copy or your copy? Any fancy?
You can use yours.
All right.
Yeah, but his has his name on it.
No, they're all the same.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So, public discussion, financial review and findings. I'm gonna run this as basically a public hearing. Anybody that speaks, or, public comments are more than welcome. That is actually one of the intentions of tonight's items, is to address any outstanding questions or comments from the public regarding the town finances, the review work that Mary and Lisa Suve and Mary McIsaac have been doing for basically the past year, and rectifying the town's bookkeeping systems, which was a substantial undertaking, as well as Charlie Sumner has worked very hard on it as well. Before they present, I just really want to thank their efforts. It was a lot longer than everybody had been expecting, and part of the reason is that we had some unexpected turnover of staff that required them to fill in for full, as the acting treasurer and acting accountant for a period of time, which definitely did delay, their timeline. So, Charlie? And so this is actually, yesterday was Charlie's last official day as town administrator. And today is Mr. Waldo's first official day as town administrator. I should have said that during announcements and public comments. I'm sorry. So, but now's the appropriate time as well. So thank you. Thank you, Ryan.
Thank you, Ryan. I'm very excited about the appointment of Rich Waldo as your town administrator. And I will just say I've known Rich for quite a long time, and you're in good hands, I can assure you. Let's just talk a little bit about what we've been up to for the last year. And I'm just going to give an overview and talk about a few issues, and then we're going to start to dig a little deeper into some of the issues that we've addressed. Anyway, I was hired just over a year ago last year to serve as your interim town administrator. And when you really talk about it, we wanted to coordinate the efforts to complete the fiscal 20 and fiscal 21 fiscal years, and of course, to cover interim vacancies in administration and finance. I was really largely tasked with doing administrative work, providing interim management services for personnel administration, budgeting, financial forecasting, contract negotiations, and grant procurement. And the finance and accounting issues, so Lisa Sauvé and Mary McIsaac provided interim treasury and accounting services to the town. Now, I will just say briefly, I know a lot of you already know Lisa and Mary, but I worked with Lisa Sauvé in Brewster for almost 28 years. Lisa was our finance director. And so she has a lot of experience in municipal finance. Mary McIsaac also had tremendous services in municipal finance, worked for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts doing local government audits back in the day when we were all young. But after that, she's had a lot of treasury and accounting experience throughout the Cape, her last position being the Director of Finance for Barnstable County. We're going to do a little chart to show how many years of municipal finance experience we had collectively, but we decided that, that would be a little embarrassing because we're a little older. But I do want to talk about some of the issues in a broader way before we get into the detail. And of course, we would like to thank the Select Board for contracting with us to help your community out. And all of the members of the Select Board over the time we've been here have been just incredibly supportive and helpful and cooperative in this exercise. So really, thank you to the board for exercising the leadership and giving us the trust to work on this project on behalf of your community. And now the Finance Committee, we have a number of members of the Wellfleet Finance Committee here. And, it obviously starts with the chair, Fred McGee, who's here, and Fred and I, Kathy Grenham as the vice chair. We've established, I believe, a very robust communication process between the Finance Committee and town administration. And in fact, the Finance Committee created a task force of 3 members that worked with us on largely a monthly basis. And we would meet with those members and go over our work effort and the product and some of the issues and problems that we experienced and we received some advice for them. So I just, the Finance Committee has stepped up and been very, very helpful, very engaged in all of these processes, which is really what their job is and is necessary in this day and age. Now, the other thing is your department heads, and I know this has been a really difficult issue for the community to deal with, but you have a core group of department heads that serve this town, that kept things going, that ran and provided services to your community in spite of, frankly, leadership vacuum that existed on dealing with municipal finance issues. So your department heads deserve a lot of credit for the work that they did during this period and the cooperation that they've given all of us as we've gone through this exercise. And I'd like to mention Eileen Davis in the police department, Jean Leidenfrost in the Department of Public Works, Teresa Townsend in the fire department, Nancy Savetta in Shellfish department, Karen Murphy, your tax collector. These people provided extraordinary assistance to us. budgets and revenues and expenditures that were incredibly helpful as we sort of, we picked up a ball of yarn that was just a tangled mess, and we had to unravel that and follow the leads where we had to. But all of these people were incredibly important to the success of this project. Now, also, we all spent a lot of time, usually about monthly or every 6 weeks. We had meetings, Zoom meetings with the Massachusetts Department of Revenue. They provided a lot of assistance and guidance to us as we went through this process. So thank you to the Department of Revenue. Lynn Welsh is our financial advisor from Unibank, helped us with a lot of the debt management issues that we had to deal with in this project. So thank you to Lynn and Unibank. And frankly, I know it's been a difficult process, but Powers and Sullivan has been the auditor for the town of Wellfleet since I think 1989. And they provided a lot of assistance and backup information to us as we started to work on this project. So I think that's it. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay. We've talked about this before, but I think for tonight, it's worth revisiting, sort of some of the problems that we've had and why do you have them. So that first block under the town administrators, since 2016, you've had 4 town administrators. And
Oh,
actually,
You forgot one there.
I made a mistake because I forgot Rich Polly, who was here for a month. So thank you for catching that. I was going to bring that up. So Rich is trying to put that behind him. Anyway, in essence, you've had 5 town administrators during that period. And from 2014 to current, you've had 3 assistant town administrators. And I will say that you're quite lucky to have Rebecca Ruffley as your current town administrator, and Rebecca Ruffley is right here sitting in the room. So for those of you who haven't met her, she's really doing a wonderful job. And then here we get to even more issues of concern. Under the town accountant, you've had 6 town accountants since 2017. And I think you know where I'm going. And then if you go to the last bar chart, you've had 4 town administrators since 2015. Oh, sorry, town treasurer. See, Lisa has covered up for me for years, so.
Just helping.
So, why do I show this chart? It's really the essence of the problems that you've had to deal with is that, during, you had a long run where you had a very stable financial team from what I understand provided good, solid services to the town of Wellfleet for a long time. And you went through this period where you had rapid and consistent turnover in a number of critical positions. And it's a recipe for problems. And then on top of that, of course, you were transitioning from one financial software platform, BMSI, to your current municipal software, financial software package, Vadar. And that happened in July 1st, 2019, all in the middle of this incredible turnover of town staff. And so, it really was the essence of the problems that you had to deal with. Now, I was a town administrator for 37 years in 3 different communities, but mostly in Brewster. And, let's face it, when you're the chief administrative officer for the town, it's my job to make sure that these problems, if they occur, are addressed in a timely basis. And I think that's the biggest thing that I'll say before we get into a lot of the details is you had problems and issues with the transition from BMSI to Vadar, and the problems were solving process was delayed. And just a part of me that would say, the moment you had that transition on July 1st, 2019, and you frankly had a vacancy in the town accountant's office, and you didn't have beginning balances established for July 1st, that's a huge red alert warning signs, all the bells and whistles that could possibly go off should have gone off at that moment. They didn't. And I think, I think, you do it, I've done it myself. You have a problem. You think a few more weeks or a few more months, you can overcome them and fix all the problems that you might need to deal with. But this one, they could never catch up with the initial problems from July 1st, 2019. And then when you combine that with this incredible turnover of critical staff at that moment, it really reflects the conditions that you're in today. Now, before I'm going to have Lisa and Mary talk about several issues, but our work effort has been to take the situation that we inherited in May of 2021, and we really wanted to go back. We really wanted to dive back as far as we possibly could, try to touch as many transactions, journal entries, accounting issues as we possibly could, because there were so many errors and omissions. It required that type attention to detail in that work effort in order to establish some balances that go back to July 1st that we had confidence reflected the fiscal condition of the town of Wellfleet. Now, I remember when the board hired me in May of 2021, I went downstairs in my basement for my interview. And I assured my wife that I wasn't going to get the job. And when I came up, she said, "How'd your interview go?" And I said, "Really well. I start next week." So, now when I started in May of 2021, did I ever think that I would still be working for the town of Wellfleet in May of 22? I didn't. I thought we would be finished by now. But Ryan touched upon this at the beginning of the meeting, is in October of 2021, the assistant town accountant was out for 4.5 months on an appropriate leave, and that's fine. Now, what that meant is Lisa Sauvé, who was the interim town accountant, was serving as the town accountant for day-to-day operations. She was the assistant town accountant doing all the entries for everything that goes on in the town accountant's office, and still doing the reconciliation work that had to be done. So we didn't complain. We just it's sort of the nature of our being. We just put our nose to the grindstone and we just kept working. And then on December 1st, 2021, Mariam Spencer, your town treasurer, resigned, which was fine. But so what that created a situation where I had very little choice, and I had to threaten Mary McIsaac to say, "Mary, you're now the interim town treasurer, and you're still going to do as much reconciliation, recreation work as you can possibly do." So Mary did that for 3.5 months. So these are some of the complex issues that occurred when we were working on this project. But, we're all sort of similar age and mentality about serving our local governments. And we felt like we made a commitment to the town of Wellfleet, and that in spite of all these odds and all these obstacles, that, we felt obligated to get you to a place where you could function effectively going forward. So, in the end, 95% of this work is because of Lisa and Mary. These two women are professionals, highly competent, and terribly committed to, local government. And that's why we persevered through all of this. So anyway, I think I'm just going to turn this over a little bit, and I think Mary is going to talk a little bit, Mary.
Sure.
Yep.
Are we going to talk about structural issues?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, do you want me to do that?
Well, it's fine, whichever you want. Do you want to work on the budget and we'll work? Okay.
Yeah, we're sharing here. So I already talked about some of the issues that we've had with the financial software conversion. And then, clearly, I think I should just touch upon the budgeting issues. And when you think about it, when we went to the 2022 annual town meeting last June, you didn't have a warrant and you didn't have a budget 6 weeks before town meeting. And there were a number of people that stepped up to do incredible work on behalf of the community, particularly Dan Silverman, your town moderator, and Harry Tarkanian, one of your previous town administrators. And of course, Rich Pauley was the interim town administrator at that time. So, we did the best we could under really trying, difficult circumstances. But the reality is the budget development process was flawed. It didn't have the robust review process that is necessary in developing a financial model for the town for a new fiscal year. And when you look at the warrant, you're going to see that because we have a lot of unpaid bills on the warrant. We have a lot of budgetary transfers on the warrant. We had a lot of deficiencies in the current budget that we're going to have to deal with on June 11th, 2022. But I do believe the budget process that we went through this year, we also hired a woman by the name of Judy Sprague, who has a lot of municipal finance services on Cape Cod. Her most significant recent experience was with the Centerville, Osterville, Marston Mills Fire Department. She really ran all of their payroll, administrative and finance operations there. So Judy was very, very important to helping me put a budget together that included meetings with department heads, and included an evaluation of, the town's ability, capacity to finance this budget. So I think, and of course, we worked really closely with the Finance Committee during this time. And, they also provided a lot of advice and assistance as we went through this process. So we're very, very grateful. Same thing with the town warrant. This is the time when we put all our warrant articles together. And as I say, I think that, that's an effort that we undertook, and I think it's in pretty good shape. And I think that, except for the override that I'm going to be recommending at the end of this meeting, we have a process that was robust and complete and inclusive and collaborative. So we're really happy with the status of that. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more later on. So I think Mary's going to talk about use of reserves and free cash.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can everybody hear me? Just want to make sure. And this little component part of this slide really has to do, really draws from an analysis of the recaps that were approved by the Department of Revenue. There's specific schedules that document the certifications of free cash and your use of free cash as voted, and also document any available funds that the town chooses to vote for a specific purpose during their budget, during their annual town meeting where they vote their budget. When Charlie talks about budgeting and we talk about, and he gets to talking about override and where we are, it's important. This is an important cornerstone for you to understand. The tracking of these specific things has shown that over the course of many years, at least the last 5 and more than that, the town has been tracking not to have tremendous growth in reserve balances, but to always go to the ceiling of those
reserves and actually taking from reserves that maybe a gentleman's agreement is, for instance, Chief Polly has an ambulance fund, and traditionally ambulance funds are used to replace ambulances, to provide, to subsidize costs of EMS and other things that are, lawfully and logically uses of EMS. There's an argument for using ambulance money towards budgets, but generally speaking, that's not a practice, really. It's not a practice you should embrace. But in the case of Wellfleet, over the last 5 years, you've gone from using 50% of your ambulance money to using 98% of your ambulance money in FY21. So completely draining that reserve without the capability or the capacity to grow it back from how severely you've damaged that balance. Same thing for beach revenues. Beach revenues are coming in at over $1 million. But in the first instance in 2017, you used 70% of your beach money to support your operating budget and other, and some capital items. But using $1 million every year when you're not able to replenish that brought you to FY21, where we see that in 21, you used 91% of your available beach money towards your budget, towards your operating budget, and left yourselves with $110,000 to begin the next year. So you can see that it's the case for your budget situation was critical already. And so instead of addressing the imbalance in your budget and considering that perhaps you are getting beyond what you could afford without some other kind of creative budgeting and methodology to bring you into the future, you were just simply drawing from these buckets to backfill and balance your budget. But what has happened really is put you in a position where these reserves are drained. You haven't had free cash certified because of these fiscal 20 and 21 issues that you've had, but kind of thankfully that's going to be sort of a gift because it gave the town, it's giving the town a chance to recover from also abusing the free cash balance. So, this is really resetting your clock. I mean, it's unfortunate that things have happened the way that they've happened and these conditions have presented themselves in Wellfleet, but the fact of the matter is it's giving you a chance to sort of reset your clock, traditionalize your budgeting, get a process, stick to it, understand what happens to reserves, what your capacity is to rebuild them if you use them, and really answer the question about what they're suited for and what they're there for, and be very careful about spending them so that you have stability going forward and you're not every year scrambling to try to balance your budget, wondering where the money's come from, understanding that 2.5% doesn't really get you there over time. You really have to have a discussion, a serious discussion about overrides, because you have to lift that ceiling, because providing these services that you all want your townspeople to have, and you have created this environment in your town where this is how you want to do business and this is what you want to offer your taxpayers. You have to be able to afford that. You just can't afford it under 2.5%. And most communities can't, and they have a traditional way of projecting whether they need an override every 3 years for their budget or their capital, or they need an override every 5 years. But it's really built into the structure of how you work and how you understand what the future of your town looks like financially and how you want to keep it stable. So just a little lesson and sort of a little snapshot about how the train sort of got driven for the last 5 years in terms of your reserves and your free cash, and how that's really contributed to where you are today. So, so it's important to sort of have that conversation in your mind when you're listening to budget requests and you're listening to people, advocate for ways to budget and ways to create stability for your future, because you want financial stability of a great little town. And there's no reason why you can't go forward and everybody be comfortable and have that stability to give your taxpayers the kind of services they want and need and you want to provide to them. So that's important. Sure.
Before we go to the next slide. Yeah, and I think Mary reminded me of a couple of things that we worked on. So when Lisa took over as the town accountant, one of the things is we updated the chart of accounts. And I just want Lisa to talk about that a little bit, and then I want to talk about one other related issues to Mary's comments.
Excuse me,
Were you ready?
yes. Well, had a lozenge. The chart of accounts that was converted from BMSI to Vadar was flawed. There is a uniform municipal accounting system that provides reporting consistently beyond with departments. For example, in Wellfleet, you vote salaries and expenses. There's 4 different kind of salaries, you know, your full-time, part-time, overtime, longevity, et cetera, et cetera. Your expenses are everything from vehicle repairs to supplies. The way that the chart was set up was that you could not separate the wage category from the expense category. That was very important. You could not tell if you were over budget on your wages in total or not. The account numbers were not uniform. So that, you know, groundskeeping supplies was number 8257 in one department, and it was 4872 in another part. So there was inconsistency all along. So that being very important to have that reporting capability, I made a new chart for the general fund, the water enterprise, and the marine enterprise. Reports were not being sent out to your departments monthly. They are now being sent out monthly with this new reporting mechanism. It's been well received. They get their monthly reports. If we've made errors, they let us know, we fix them. I did that also on the revenue side. A lot of your revenues were one number for everything that was for the department. So you could not separate what types of revenues you were receiving so that you could track them. And that was the importance of this chart. So now this is a management tool. So you can say, how much do we spend on office supplies? You just go on the computer, you put in that one number, everybody's supply number comes up and what they expended versus having to remember that there's, you know, 7 different numbers for office supplies. And that's just a small example, but that's what the chart of accounts is used for. And now it's running smoothly in those 3 operations. So that's what I wanted to say about the chart.
Yeah, thanks. And the only,
Time consuming, but well worth it.
well, it's critical to, you know, running a municipal finance operation. So it's really an essential item that frankly is shocking that it didn't exist in the manner that it should. So now, the only other thing that I was thinking about Mary's comments is one of the other efforts that I worked on a great deal, and Mary and Lisa assisted, is a 5-year revenue and expenditure forecast. And that's another item that sort of dovetails with what Mary talked about, is you really need to analyze your revenues and your expenditures and do some projections about what's going to happen over time. So we have created a model that you can use going forward. And it still needs a little bit of tweaking. But I've talked to your new town administrator, Rich Waldo, and I'll be glad to sort of transition once we get into the new fiscal year of setting up the format that for that same system next year. So it'll be easier for your staff to utilize it. So that's in place. And the other thing I'd say about local receipts is, you know, I always used to say as a local government manager, I was a money grubbing hound, right? Every revenue stream was incredibly important to track and maintain because it takes a lot of money to maintain a municipal operation. And so, you know, we always analyzed revenues on a quarterly basis in Brewster anyway. And then we would project out over multiple years. And the other thing is, even when we analyzed our revenues, you know, in our case, we'd probably use 75 to 80% of our revenues to subsidize the town budget. And, you know, why do we do that? And I'll just use, I think it's Whitecrest Beach was closed, right? So yeah, your Whitecrest Beach was closed during COVID. That resulted in a revenue loss of over $300,000, I believe. But in your case, you were using every single penny of your beach revenues. And when you lost that, it had a devastating impact on your budget for FY '22. So our model always has been use 75 or 80% of your revenues. What happens with the balance of those revenues? You collect more than you're estimated, they end up ultimately in certified free cash. So it helps on that side as well. So that's another system that we've put in place. And I think it's easily maintained going forward. So I think that's all I have to say about that.
I think we can move to the fiscal 20 and fiscal 21 slide. Oh, we're at the audit, yep. Yeah, turn around. So we're talking about the financial audit and the auditors. We know there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of angst surrounding the published auditors, audited financial statements for fiscal 20. The books weren't closed. You've just heard from Charlie, and we'll continue to talk about the issues that we saw in fiscal 20 and fiscal 21 because of that dramatic turnover that Charlie just walked you through, and a lot of other factors that that really created a lot of instability and an opportunity for mistakes, and they really did happen. And there were just so many mistakes. It's just incredible. But when the auditors came in, it's important to understand that the auditors have a set of standards that they have to follow in order to, number one, come in and perform audit testing, and number two, be able to feel comfortable that they're able to render an opinion on the financial statements and whether they present fairly the financial condition of the community at a date, at a date certain, which is usually for all communities, June 30th, right? So these auditors came in and they did exactly what they're supposed to do. They did their testing. They met their levels of testing that they were required to meet. They performed, testing outside of the realm of what is normal and customary because of the situation, but they didn't find any reason to believe that the numbers did not convey the financial position of the community, and therefore they gave the community a clean, we call it a clean opinion, but an unqualified opinion. They did accompany that with a management letter that was pretty enlightening, I think, for the readers, because it pretty much opened the door to the conversation about a lot of issues that really were plaguing the town, that were internal control issues that really were showing the auditors that there was a growing risk that the financial statements were not going to be able to be supported. So if management doesn't have internal controls in place, they don't keep the controls secure, they don't do reconciliations, they're not watching the numbers, management isn't properly overseeing things, you create this environment where there's a great risk that the numbers don't add up. The numbers don't work and they don't clearly represent where you are. But the auditors went, they did their testing, they met their thresholds, and they were able to give you an opinion. We know that internally there were a lot of problems and a lot of mistakes. But the standard that Lisa and I have been applying in our work is much more granular. It's a much deeper dive. And it's really using different standards than what the auditors are required to use to render an opinion on the financial statements. So I want to be really clear about that. The second thing I'd like to be clear about in the conversation is that we talk about forensic auditing, and I think somewhere along the line, there's been some conversation to suggest that we're here because we're looking for stolen money. That is so far from the truth. I can categorically state to you, and Charlie and Lisa will agree, that we were not commissioned to come in here to look for an amount of money that was stolen by someone in your town. That categorically is not the case. We were brought in to fix the mistakes. We were brought in to create a historical record that reflected the actual activity of the town for 2 years of time that were rife with mistakes, omissions, Budget's not recorded. You name it. I think the list of mistakes that could have happened, happened. And, you know, there's a lot of blame to go around. You know, we can clearly see how these things can occur. I mean, you just can't function in an office when there's nobody there. You know, when there's nobody there working with institutional knowledge that has support staff to be able to get their jobs done, you just can't get it done. And that's when the wheels fall off, which is really what happened. You know, we have great dedicated people in town hall, but you can't do everything. You know what I mean? And you can't do it alone, you need a team. So the financial auditors, the Powers and Sullivan, they met their thresholds. They did what they were supposed to do and they gave your town an unqualified opinion. They also gave you a management letter that we were brought in to address. And I'm happy to tell you that for the component pieces of the management letter, we're probably close to 90% of clearing all of the comments that are in the management letter. We've done a deep dive into all their concerns. We've addressed everything that we can possibly address, and some things will resolve over time. They're just not there yet. But we feel really comfortable that all of the significant and material weaknesses that they brought up to your attention in the management letter have been addressed and vetted by us. And there'll be a complete analysis and report on that when we're through.
Mary, 1 second.
Sure.
Can you just clarify to everybody what would have happened if you did see any evidence of wrongdoing?
Of course, when we did transaction testing on literally thousands of transactions, and a lot of the times when we were doing that testing, we saw a number in Vadar, the new accounting system, and we tracked it all the way back to a turnover that had a bank deposit slip in it. And we made sure that that money that was in the books went in the bank. If we had tested transactions that we could not see that line firmly entrenched, and that we had questions about whether that really happened or there was money, but why wasn't it in the bank, we would have definitely documented everything we found. We would have searched further for other transactions that appeared to be the same, looking for a trend to make sure that we were certain that we were not looking at theft, that we were not looking at collusion, which is much harder to identify, but you can identify it. We would have never left a question unanswered in our testing of transactions, but we never found that.
Thank you.
Kathleen, that's a question. You want to keep?
Yeah, I just want to get them through the, but can you just speak to the mic?
Is this gonna work?
Hopefully.
Kathleen Bacon, just Mary, while you're here at this point, one comment. For the record, would you characterize this period, these mistakes, for the record, as gross negligence?
Well, negligence is a pretty strong word. You know, I think that, I hate to use that word, to be truthful. I think that there were a lot of factors involved in how mistakes occurred. Definitely, I would not classify any of the errors and omissions that we found to be negligence that was purposeful. You know, I mean, I think these mistakes happened because people maybe weren't paying attention. They didn't know or understand their job. They didn't understand the accounting system. I find it difficult to walk across that line to say that people willfully ignored the direction that they were supposed to take in their jobs. You know, I wasn't here. We weren't here every day. We came into this so far after a lot of these transactions occurred. These people, we don't even know them. We never met them. You know, it's hard to get a sense when you're working with someone alongside someone and difficulties are occurring, you can get a sense of whether that person really is negligent or that person has, you know, is just doesn't have the qualifications for the job. I think there's more of that than there is of classic negligence, to be truthful.
Yep.
Sure.
And I think I'd like to add also that there were a number of people that were hired that I believe lacked some of the sophisticated training and skills in these municipal finance issues that was required to do the job. And I think the other thing is the town hasn't invested properly in training. and requiring participation. You know, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the professional association, the treasurers, the collectors, the accounting association have rigorous training programs to provide assistance to communities. And a number of your local officials weren't taking advantage of those training opportunities. So I think that, you know, that made it even more difficult. And the other thing I would say is, you know, we're all kind of lifers, you know, we've all been municipal public officials for a long time. There's a network in associations of local officials that help each other succeed. And all the three of us, we reach out to, you know, fellow officials in other communities for advice and assistance all the time. And I don't think that was happening as a matter of practice here. And I do know that there were some other towns that did reach out to Wellfleet to offer some help, but there was a resistance to that at the time. But I think training is the biggest issue, I would say, lack of it.
So I would agree with Charlie, and to maybe conclude my comments about your question, I would say that if you would consider that someone was offered an opportunity to be educated and to be trained formally in their job and they refuse to do that, that's negligence, for sure. You know, you have a professional responsibility to be able to perform your job to the best of your ability, and you can't do that if you're not educated and trained. You're welcome. So I think we'll move on. We will probably talk about, I'll run quickly through this slide that we talk about, you know, when the work commenced for us. And the standards that we followed, but really just to list them. You know, we always look to Mass General laws for guidance. The first thing we sit down and talk about when we're talking about any kind of fund or any kind of activity that we're supposed to be straightening out the accounting, we look at what the law is that guides us. If it's a grant agreement, we look at what the federal government says about how we're supposed to handle this. And that's how we work. So we start with the law. We look at the town's charter and the town's bylaws to see if there's any other, if it sort of narrows the scope of what we have the ability to do based on what the town has sought to, you know, sort of what kind of boundaries they've created to further constrict your ability to make choices about different things. We also use the state created Uniform Municipal Accounting System, which was, geez, I was on the committee at the DOR that created this chart of accounts in the 80s. So I'm going to just say that really quickly, but we also followed GAP, which is independent auditors and accountants follow GAP, which are generally accepted accounting practices. And we follow a lot of very highly published best practices that are adopted by communities all across Massachusetts, and they're accepted to be the best practices in certain areas of this industry. We also consulted, as Charlie said, with the DOR. We met with Lynn Welsh at Unibank for guidance and advice on the town's debt position. And we worked with Powers and Sullivan. Everything that we requested from them, they gave us. And they were cooperative with us the whole time down the road. So the whole time we've worked, we've had a lot of cooperation from a lot of people. And we haven't, in our cases either, hesitated, you know, to consult with people to get the best possible advice so we can give you the best end product. And so when we're going to get into our body of work, the theory behind our work when we first sat down and saw really the scope of the problem here was we had a situation where we had numerous funds. No one really knew where anything really was in terms of financial position. And so we were tasked to really try to figure that out. In this case, it was difficult because the accounting records were defective, but also the treasury records were defective. Usually when you come into a community, you can see that you can rely on the treasurer's office records because they're impeccable. Or you can go into the accounting office and you can say, you can rely on those records as opposed, you know, because one set of records is stronger than the other, and you know, it's an easier time of fixing the problems because you have a solid record to rely on. In this situation, we really could not rely on either office for in totality. So what we really had to do was make a case study for each item of both sides of the aisle, kind of, right? The accounting side and the treasury side, and marry those two together to get the best possible answer, and then confirm the money part with the bank and do a lot of other tests that we, required of ourselves in order to establish balances of all of your restricted funds, other special funds, because we thought if we separated all these highly specialized funds and all these funds that had their own special purpose, then really what we were left with is the general fund. And whatever was left for a variance or a problem, it belongs to the general fund, your general operating fund. And that was really how we attacked our body of work. It was tedious. Lisa has posted thousands and thousands, I tell you, of correcting entries. And we're really almost there. We've been uploading to the auditors. We feel like we're in a really good place. A lot of changes have been made. And we're going to leave you with a historical record that you can rely on. So that body of work really came, sort of developed out of that whole theory of how do we really attack this whole picture when we're not sure what we can rely on, but we have to make sure that all these buckets are true. You know what I mean? That we have the right answer, that we know how much money belongs in every place, and we've categorically stated that, in our own set of financial statements that are internal to the town. So we've done a lot of that, processed through 20 and 21.
Mary, before you
Sure.
continue, can you just speak to the records that you received from the departments and their role in keeping records?
Sure. Charlie was, yeah, Lisa would love to
Yep.
take this.
I'm going back and forth and now I guess I'm saying. I was hired in November of 2020.
Can you just speak into the mic?
I was hired in November of 2020. The first thing I did was I ran your general ledgers. You have, this is called fund accounting. You have 21 funds, over 153 accounts, and they're all labeled by fund, by project, within each fund. Not all of them are balanced. They were actually out of balance by $2.1 million. This means your debits and credits were not properly recorded in those new links when you went from BMSI to Vadar. The very first thing that jumped out at me was when I turned to, and you're going to hear Mary talk about Fund 92 and 93. 93 is an agency account, which means the town is an agent. We take in the money for the police details, we pay the police. We take in the money from payroll, we pay the payroll. It should always be a zero balance. I looked at the police detail. Very first thing that jumped out at me was there is no way that the police detail has $337,747.57. There's just no way. So that's where I started. And that's when I found that within this fund, and like I said, everything has a balance. There was an account called undesignated fund balance, $899,257.22. This is where I started my work. This was the most important, jumped right out off the books at me. So when I went to this fund, pulled out all the revenues, pulled out all the expenses, pulled out all the links, and found multiple, and for a year and a half, items being processed to the wrong accounts. Deputy collector going to the firearms fee. Firearms fee, $77,000. I don't think so. So these are the kind of things that spur us to dive deeper into those accounts. So I just wanted to talk about that within this Fund 93, because that's really what started the ball. And then I ran reports on links and I found how the links were incorrect. This could have been, all this work could have been fixed within the first month or two after the conversion. Because when you balance your books, you do it every single month. After your last warrants, after your last revenues, you make sure your revenues and your expenditures balance to this. When they don't, you're in trouble. And this trouble just went on and on and on and on. So that's what we were tasked with. And we have lists and lists and lists of and numbers and numbers and numbers of items that have been charged to the wrong place, double posted, not posted at all, duplicate postings. It just goes on and on and on. But that's what I wanted to say, so. I had to jump out at that because I even wrote on there, keep, because I want to see the end result versus what I found in November 3rd, 2020.
And could
2020.
you just speak to how important the separate records were that the departments kept?
Oh, these ladies are invaluable. The police, fire, DPW, Nancy Savita, for example. I have a list that we'll be going through later on, but there was an article on the town books to take all the money from Shellfish and separate it, split it 75-25. Never done. Accountant never did it. Treasurer never saw it. Beach wasn't aware of it until we came along. So Nancy provided me with a report from BMSI that had that beginning balance. And I had to search and search and search, but I found it. And then I could go forward and do the split of the 75-25. Eileen at the PD with all the grants that she has. Same with the fire. Ambulance fund, we found, 25 incorrect postings in 1 year, 15 incorrect in another year. These folks kept their internal records, gave them to us. We audited their records against what was reported, and then we could go forward and fix. So each one of these things, we heavily relied. DPW has so many special articles for all your departments. They take care of everything. Terrific records once again. When I first came, these balances in all those special articles that you have, trucks and, fix the roof and this and that, they were not even on the books. They were not on your books when I arrived in November from July. Had to recreate it using all of your resources that you have helped us get to a better place.
Yeah, but just be careful. I'm trying not to open it to discussion, just clarifying.
That's what I'm looking.
Okay.
I just wondered if you could clarify for us the process by which something gets double entered or entered in the wrong place or not entered at all.
Okay, well, duplicate postings happened for the months of July and August. The revenues were posted as a lump sum. You're supposed to book your revenue each and individually by each individual turnover. They were done as a lump. There was no packet that says, this is the July packet, this is the August packet, number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. So that July, August was the big stumbling block for us. But that's how it should work. You should do every single revenue individually so you could track it.
Okay, Mike?
I was just wondering, not to go way off topic, but can we bring back up the staff turnover chart up there? I just had a question about, we implemented VADAR in July of 2019, right?
Yes.
And it looks like our accountant left March of 2019, and we didn't have an accountant until September, the end of September in 2019. And then it also looks like we had our treasurer left January of 2019, and we didn't have a treasurer until July of 2019.
Yep.
So there was no one in the accounting office while they were implementing VADAR as an actual accountant, just an acting accountant.
Correct. I
And
don't even know if it was an acting accountant. I think it was Dan Hort,
it was just Dan
I believe.
or,
And then I believe
and
there was a
then the
company,
assistant.
Eric Kinshaw. I've heard that name
Okay.
bantered around. I haven't seen anything with his name on it.
okay, yeah, I mean, that's when I got on the board was July 2019. So I remember the VADAR coming online. So I just wanted to kind of point that out.
Okay.
I just noticed that there was no one in the accounting office when we implemented the system.
Right, but the conversion does take time. Then you
Sure.
start first on July 1st.
Right.
So there were a couple of hands in the pie before it went live on July 1st.
I'm trying not to open it too much to questions here.
I don't have
yeah.
a question, I have a statement. So this chart's wonderful. I have a sloppy version of it on my studio wall. But the real speed bump, and I was around for it, an outsider, but still here on this board, was when the town treasurer, the town accountant, the town treasurer also being the town clerk at that time, and the tax collector, all left within 2 years. That's not on here. And they had been all doing the job in certain ways for a long time. And the auxiliary staff, you know, the supporting staff, had been relating to that. And that's really part of the reason for that kind of turnover, along with everything else. Thank you.
So if we can just continue, sorry, I'll get to you.
I just want to say one thing to Helen's point. It's now known as the Great Town Hall Reboard. You had a reorganization of people that were leaving and, oh, that person's going to do those 2 jobs. And we're going to switch this person to go into that office and do those 2 jobs. It was all done basically as a reorganization because we couldn't attract employees. I think you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
And-
can we please let them continue with their presentation, please? Thank you.
I got off key because I wanted to talk about.
Oh, sure. So I think my final comments on body of work have to do with, and I want to speak directly to the management letter, material weakness, in which they discussed the conditions surrounding treasurer's cash and how the treasurer handled processing funds for the town. We did do an exhaustive review of the treasurer's cash. The treasurer had a cash book modeled by the Department of Revenue, but it wasn't being used properly, and it didn't produce balances that were even attempted to be reconciled to the town accountant's books. So we really found a lot of errors and omissions in how cash was reported. We could, we had to see that the cash was in the bank, but what was reported to accounting didn't really jive with that. And sometimes things weren't reported. Sometimes things were reported 2 times because we saw a lot of entries that the assistant town accountant posted an entry, but maybe 2 days later, the actual town accountant posted the same entries. So Lisa was backing out entries left and right because things were posted twice. And we had a lot of situations where we think it was, really just no training or education in how the treasurer's office was supposed to really function. So all these kinds of errors occurred. We had band proceeds of $3 million that were put into a bank account that is a highly restricted fund set up by Mass General Law, and then money was spent out of that, and that's not allowed under the law either. So we had to dig through all these funds and find money where it was and move it to where it was supposed to be. We had a lot of different situations where we have taxation aid in your town that was recorded as a charge to overlay, which is a reserve for tax abatements and exemptions, and it's illegal to charge taxation aid awards to that. But we discovered that, and the DOR allowed us to replenish overlay for those amounts and correct the books, even though, we had testimony that was provided to the state when we set the tax rate that had overlay at a certain number, but it included those deductions for taxation aid awards. So they allowed us to replenish it, readjust the number, and we were able to correct it in that regard. But also with respect to treasurer's cash, we had money that just, like I said, wasn't reported, but we could see it in the bank. So that meant we sort of had to steer the ship in another direction when we were talking about proving cash and making sure we were good. Where the cash book didn't properly reflect everything, we really went back to the bank statements and analyzed all of the bank statements, all of the debits, all of the credits. We visually inspected all the bank statements, and we took away from the bank statements money that was transferred simply from one bank to another bank, because that isn't really revenue or a deposit, that's just a transfer. to come up with a net activity, and we compared that against Vadar. That was really the deep dive into cash that we did in order to do our own reconciliation and come up with a variance. But there is this lack of understanding, and in one instance, $110,000 was moved from a bank account that was being closed, but it was reported to accounting as a revenue. And that's $110,000, but that wasn't money that ever went in the bank. It just was money that was moved. So these are the kinds of errors that we, discovered in our review of transactions and a real deep dive into transactions in order to be able to come up with accurate numbers that we could stand on. So with cash, we really went through as thoroughly as I think anyone's ever going to go through cash. Again, we were not looking for money that could have been stolen. That wasn't our charge. But in all our transaction testing, all our review of bank statements, all our review of all the backup, we did not see any indication of anything that we should question as fraudulent. So that really ends our review of cash. The other last item on the slide is the agency funds. And that's another item that has garnered a lot of conversation because the auditors in their report identified a final variance of $765,000, which they recorded in the agency funds. But our analysis of the agency funds, that deep dive into transactions, showed us in the first instance that in one of the agency funds, which is Fund 93, which is all of our other withholdings, these infamous police details and deputy collector money and firearms and money from both retirement systems on behalf of retirees, group insurances, all of 200 and something thousand dollars of cash receipts were recorded as cash disbursements. So the money went in the bank, but on the accounting side, the money came out of the bank. It was reported the opposite of the way it should be. And so in order to fix that, Lisa has had to reverse all these entries and then re-enter them. So when you're talking about 200 and something thousand dollars, you're talking about doubling the money. So it approximates $500,000, and that's just bookkeeping. So when the accountants are talking about this entry that they made in order to balance, they were really essentially balancing this amount that was recorded in the opposite direction of the way it should have been. So we're not talking about missing money. We're talking about gross errors in accounting that these transactional, workbooks that we have of all of our work have documented and corrected. So the agency funds for payroll withholdings, all the transactions were examined. We looked at all the recording of all the payrolls and all the deductions of from all employees' pay. We saw them go in, we saw them come out. They're just as accounting errors, and there's not anything missing in terms of cash. The money was in the bank and went out of the bank, just the same as it did in Fund 93. It was reflected in accounting the opposite of the way it was supposed to be. And you can see how it accumulates really quickly to be a big, massive number. And it's really not a cash problem. It's an accounting problem. So that's where we're at with all of that. Fortunately, the work is, we're closing the door on all of those funds. That work is substantially complete, and we're wrapping it up. So I think it's important that we have this dialogue about the agency funds, because that's been talked about, and there's worry and there's concern. But we're here to tell you that thousands and thousands of transactions have been examined by us, and we found no evidence of any fraud. It's just not there. As nearly as we can determine, it's not there. So that was the body of our work on those two items, particularly, which are most notable in terms of what you've been hearing and what's been talked about over the last year, probably. So we want to make those things really clear to you tonight. I think we'll move on to the next slide. Yeah, okay. I think what are we on to? Part one. Part one. Well, Lisa and I can sort of tag team this part one and part two because these are just specific items. And we probably could just run through them pretty quickly. It's the next slide after body of work. Most of these are charts that would be useful. I'll hand it over to Lisa.
The first item is creating that standard chart of accounts that I was talking about earlier. Did it for the general fund, the marina enterprise and the water fund. When I came on board in November, there was no long-term and short-term debt in here. No one, so Mary went online, she recreated it, confirmed everything with Unibank, and I had to make a new chart for your current debt, authorized unissued debt, short-term and long-term. So now, and we follow that all the way through to fiscal 22. So now that's a good thing. We have that. Correcting the chart of accounts to path of information. That's what Mary was just talking about. No one, once you
Lisa,
found
can
that,
you get closer to the mic,
once
please?
you find that the
Or-
link, once you found that the revenue was supposed to be a debit and you found that it was a credit, which you should have found in the first month, by the way. The link was fixed, but the person never went back and fixed all the detail. They went forward, but they didn't go back. So that's what happened. When you fix the link, you've got to go back and fix what was wrong. And that's what we've been doing, going back from the day of the fix all the way back. And if we found something that the link was incorrect, we corrected it to go forward correctly, and we have to go backwards. So it's been a lot of labor intensive. We have formalized the interim, the reporting and the revenues every single month. We're balancing to the expenditure control and the revenue control. And then we send out our monthly reports for all your review. And if you have a problem, you have an issue, we will correct it. Did you have anything to say? The town, when we do our tax recap sheet, that's how you get your tax rate set. It's called the B2, that will tell you what's in this account, how much money is in this fund when you make the vote at town meeting. You have to have those funds in the coffers at the time of town meeting. Mary went through, what, 5 years to get that, those wonderful slides talking about, using 95% of your revenues now versus, 58% 5 years ago. We've gone and Mary has reconstructed the community, well, we're still in the middle of community preservation and affordable housing trust because that's needs a lot more of our time designated just for that. I don't know if you knew, but you have 5 stabilization funds. There was only 3 on the books. Mary went through 20 trust funds and 13 escrow accounts, following literally pennies, 34 cents, 4 cents, 10 cents, to make sure that these accounts had what they were supposed to have in the bank. They were reported to accounting incorrectly, and those are the records that go to the auditors. So we had to get both those tied together. And I wanted to address your question, John. One of the reasons why, or one of the reasons that I'm suggesting that items were reported incorrectly was when they made the conversion from BMSI to Vadar, they had all new account numbers. Nobody knew what they were but the accounting department. They were never farmed out to the people using them. So they were using the old account numbers, and then someone was interpreting them and posting them to where they thought was the right place. So that's my take on how this happens, whether on the revenue side and the expenditure side. They didn't have their account numbers. So
That's
they did the
something that
best
could've-
they did what they thought they could.
That could have been addressed with proper training.
That could have been, that should have been addressed prior to July 1. They should have said, here's all your new account numbers for your revenue and your expenditures. Here we go. But like I said, they didn't even have the articles on the books in November from July. So I just wanted to get that out there. When I first got here, the first thing I did was I wanted to review the fiscal 20 capital article. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm just talking now.
We rambled. Yeah.
We rambled. I just wanted to go over some of my findings that I found because we did pages and pages. I just want to touch on a few of them. One of them being at the 20 capital article, there was a $80,000 for the fire station HVAC. What we did was we went, and we read all the town meetings to make sure that all the transfers were made. The funding source for this $80,000 was listed as other. So that's an illegal vote. There is no such funding source as other. So that's on this town meeting coming up in fiscal '23. There was a $32,000 item for a inspection vehicle. The sum was not in the warrant where it says, here's the project, and this is how you're going to fund it, whether it be free cash, borrowing, not other. And this $32,000 was not in either column for borrowing or free cash. So we have to raise this $32,000 on the recap sheet because the town went out and bought the vehicle. Another illegal vote. I talked about the Shellfish and the split. There was another wastewater funding article for $120,000 that was conditional upon the passage of a 2.5 override. The account was not set up. It did pass at the ballot, and I was informed of this in December of '21. So we set that account up and we're good to go. I talked about the long-term debt. We had 2 bond anticipation notes, one in September of '19 and one in November of '19. And the treasurer recorded them into the general fund as other. They're supposed to be in a restricted fund. These bands are a bond anticipation note to buy those trucks, to build that, the roof on the school or the police station. It's not supposed to go in the general fund. The general fund will get you free cash. Free cash would have been overstated by $3 million, to that $2.2 million. So the Department of Revenue would have caught that, and then your tax rate set would have been long and laborious. Mary talked about the closed bank account. Another item I found in recording of the tax recap, you have your real estate, your personal property, and your CPA. The town accountant here took the 3% amount of the CPA, subtracted it from the real estate commitment, and that's what they posted in the computer. So that being said, there's no way you're going to be able to reconcile your receivable. We talked about the overlay, we talked about taxation aid, talked about the ambulance fund, the fire private duty, deputy collector revenues were linked to undesignated fund balance. The expenses were quoted under the expense account number for the deputy collector, but it was linked to the police detail. Interest was reported in that account. Mass General Law says that's general fund money. Police, for police private detail, 190,000 of the detail money for that Fund 93 was recorded in the general fund as police surcharge. 54,887 of the private duty revenue was recorded as police other in the general fund. 36,617 of private duty revenue was reported directly to the general ledger, not the revenue account. 353,000 was posted of expenditures to undesignated fund balance. So these, and the firearms due to the state, 39,000 was called, police private duty was reported as firearms, 39,000 for the month of July. In August, it was 33,000. So we had to pull once you saw that, I knew there's no way they had $77,000 in firearms. So we pulled every receipt, found every deposit, found where they were recorded, had to reverse all of them. The shock mitigation fund, that's overdrawn by $19,000. We have to raise that on the recap sheet. So there was no reconciliation of your expenses and your revenues. There was no oversight, no reporting and balancing to your revenue and expenditures. And the septic betterments were not billed on your tax bill in fiscal '21. So we found that. So now in fiscal '22, we had to bill out 2 years at one time. So.
1 second, Kathy. Can you just speak in the mic? Sorry.
Just a quick clarification on that. Were those all from the Vadar transfer, or were those at different times?
Oh, these are mistakes in reporting and the links.
Okay, so it had nothing, that was outside of the Vadar transfer?
Yes.
Okay.
You mean the conversion?
Yes, it's
yes.
for
Oh, yes,
clarification
these were July and
purposes
August
only.
that we had to trace.
Mr. Wolf?
Yeah, just a question for clarification. When you refer to firearms, is that firearm permit application?
Yes, a portion goes to the town and a portion goes to the state. Well, I had private duty money in there for, $77,000.
And was this both the treasurer's ledger and the accountant's,
I'm looking at the accountant's ledger.
the accountant's ledger?
The treasurer just cares that it's money coming in,
Right, but the
except if
ban,
it's in stabilization.
so the ban, the bond anticipation notes were entered, that was the accountant entries that were,
They were reported by the treasurer to the accountant to post. Neither one of them knew that it was supposed to be in a restricted fund for those projects
and that was at end of 2019 or so?
in
2020.
September,
Okay.
no, September of 19 for
Yeah.
fiscal 20 and November of 19 for fiscal 20.
Right, okay.
So we had to pull that, $2.4 million and put it in the right place. Otherwise, your free cash would have been enormous and the light bulbs would have been off at the Department of Revenue.
Just, Lisa can run through part two. It's all accounting.
I did that. I just did the recap
Yeah.
sheet, the errors, your accounting records, the Shellfish Fund, the fire details.
We
That-
did that,
That's
we
Mary.
did that earlier.
Okay, yeah.
I think we're in the wrap-up
I think we're on
section.
final pieces.
We just want to show you how much work has been done and how much it takes to really fix this up.
Sure.
I'll jump into.
Okay. And this is the last on the slide deck. It's really called Final Pieces, and it's just really a summary of the tasks that we're wrapping up. So we're in the process of wrapping up. I would say in all material respects, our work is completed. There's, there are some final entries that need to be made, and we're preparing reports for the independent auditors and uploading to them. We are also, based on our lengthy conversations and frequent conversations with the Department of Revenue, they've asked us for some specific schedules, and we're going to supply those to them because basically you haven't had free cash for a couple of years. They're looking for some reports in those intervening years to just sort of giving them some foundation to start from to give us free cash. We're going to submit everything we need, the DOR asked for to certify free cash. We're going to help the accountant and the treasurer prepare to close fiscal 22. So I think fiscal 22 is in really good shape. Lisa's been really good about reconciling, sending out reports, communicating with department heads. We've been tracking the revenues, and Lisa's really good about saying, geez, what about, do we get the state money or where's this grant money? And really tracking after things the way accountants and treasurers should be doing on a monthly basis. So I think I will say, thanks to Lisa, I think your FY22 is in really good shape. Hand it over to Nick, your new accountant. I think he's going to have a much easier time of closing FY22 than anyone would have had for 20 and 21. And at the end of this all, we're going to draft our findings and recommendations based on this lengthy and exhaustive internal review in consideration of giving administration and finance a final document about all of our observations of material and some not so material but vital areas that we want to make sure everybody keeps their eye on the ball, because we're not going to be here. And it's important to not let all this work slide, just because people are unaware. So we're going to make sure that we draft an exhaustive report for people to be able to just stay on track and keep their eye on the ball. And I'm pretty sure you won't see this again.
And can you just speak to the variance?
So we can speak to the variance, but until all of the other variances of the other funds are closed to the general fund, I can't give you a number. So the number that will sit on the general fund balance sheet as a variance by DOR rules will sit on the balance sheet for 3 years, and then it will close to unreserved fund balance. So if it's a positive, it will increase your free cash in that year. And if it's a negative, it will decrease your free cash in that third year. And then all of your books, all of your funds will be clean.
Fred?
I'm going to try to ask this as a question, but I think it's implied with the last thing that Mary said. And I'm trying to process this through the lens of being on the finance committee. Part of what I'm hearing is that it wasn't just a function of ignorance, it was also a function of lack of process. Reconciling is a communications process as much as anything, right? And you were fortunate to get good numbers from the departments, but had there been a better communications 2 years ago between the treasurer, the accountant, and the departments, perhaps some of these questions would have arisen then. Are you going to, in your final guidance, suggest process improvements by which the department heads, the accountant, the treasurer can regularly communicate to just validate that they have the same numbers, the same assumptions about where they are year to date, and so on?
Lisa's already doing that. So Lisa has created really a culture and an environment where your town departments are expecting to see monthly reports of their activity. And they are understanding that they're expected to review them and communicate with the accounting office about any variances or any questions that they have. And that's your reconciliation process. And Lisa has already started to sort of embed that in the culture of your department heads. And that's really important. Other processes we should have the same effort with other processes. And we'll develop that as a set of procedures for accounting and treasury.
Mr. Sumner, would it make sense to open it to general questions at this point and then address the budget issues after?
I think it's fine, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So we'll take any questions about either clarification or just general questions about issues related to how the town had been, I don't know, operating its accounting department or accounting or finances, I should say. So are there any? All right. So you,
Yes.
one second. So you said there's the ban or 2 bond anticipation notes were recorded into the general fund. And are we still having to budget to pay those back now, or were they paid off in the past when the bond was taken out?
You know, they're bond anticipation notes, which means you're making pay downs for the next 10 years or 5 years, however long each component piece of that ban is.
Yeah.
And
Can you just speak into the microphone?
oh yeah, and those were meant to actually be bonded and were not bonded. Is that correct? Or I was unclear
I don't
about.
know. The rumor is that, you know, some town administrators like to bond, some town administrators like to ban. I prefer a bond, but
Okay, I thought the bond anticipation note was that you get the money up front and then you bond that money in the future.
yes, that is the practice. That's
Okay,
the normal
and that's
practice.
not what happened. So
Correct. But
basically, we're
yes,
paying the debt off in a shorter term.
yes, you could roll it into another bond. You could roll it into your next bond.
Yeah, all right. So but that causes a spike in property tax at that time because we're paying interest, we're paying a higher principal every year than we would be if it was bonded for 30 years or something.
Correct.
Helen?
You can call me Ms. Wilson.
Okay, Ms. Wilson.
Hi, this is an observation. We have a new town administrator. And we have the passing of the torch. And I've mentioned this before in various contexts. And Lisa and Mary, Ms. McIsaac and Ms. Souvet, you both addressed this in part. But my observation is, I think particularly in the next year going forward, that there needs to be a kind of, not just reports from the department, you know, every month, but there needs to be some kind of oversight mechanism, whether it's meetings about specifically following this new way to go with the TA, who is the supervisor of all this, and the people in the what I call the financial network, which actually on the outside of it also includes the town clerk, sort of,
Yes, the
surprisingly.
Town clerk does record town meeting, so yes.
Yeah, and those three retirements that I referred to earlier, Don Rickman was our treasurer and town clerk. Marianne Nickerson was our collector, and Marilyn Crary was our accountant, and they'd all been in the saddle for years. So I wanted to name their names, but also say, I am the most worried about the new employees with a new way to go that's been set up by people who will not be here, really getting with the program and feeling good about it. And I don't know how you guys are going to do it, but it's not just going to happen by itself, I think.
Can you speak to the oversight program that you've developed?
Yeah, thank you. So, clearly the three of us don't want this effort wasted. You've invested a lot of money hiring the three of us, and I think you can get a sense tonight that Lisa and Mary, I'll use that because have done an excruciatingly detailed work product. Now, they still have some work to do to close out 20 and 21. And then they'll work with your current financial staff, with the auditors to do the audit for 21. They'll help out, close out fiscal 22 and open fiscal 23. So all of those aspects of a busy season will provide services too. And then once we get through that effort, free cash certification is going to be a robust, challenging process that we'll get through. We're going to help with those efforts too. And I think the only other thing that I had mentioned in the budget process is, and by the way, Nick Robinson, our new town accountant, is out here. So,
No vacation for you this summer?
Nope.
Me
He's a-
neither.
Yeah. So Nick is here. Cameron Scott is our new treasurer, is not here, but he's been, sort of slowly getting involved in the more details of the municipal treasury function, Nick and the accounting function. Lisa and Mary, we've budgeted money. We don't want to work 30 hours a week. We don't want to work every week, but if we can provide services on a level that's modest with reasonable frequency, will assist in that transition going forward. And I think that the first 6 months is really critical. But once that happens, they're reconciling every month, doing the critical reporting functions that are required every month. They'll get very comfortable, ingrained in municipal finance. And then also, I talked to our new town administrator today, and we've been talking quite a bit already. And the training opportunities that are available through our associations in the state, your staff's going to be participating in those programs. And those are incredibly important, in terms of gaining a level of confidence and expertise and knowledge in municipal finance. And then also, we've talked about this before, the Department of Revenue. I know, sometimes we all sort of look at the state as being a mysterious, difficult organization to deal with. The Department of Revenue is not. They are available to assist. They're very cooperative, and they want Wellfleet to succeed as well. So they'll be there for you in the long run.
Kathleen Bacon.
Kathleen Bacon, first all, everybody, I'm awestruck, absolutely awestruck. And I'm to understand that going forward, you're leaving us a blueprint. Am I correct? You're calling it a draft report. I'd like to refer to it as a blueprint of something that we can actually follow. And when we go out off of that plan, then, then red flags should go up. I'm reminded of something Charlie said when he first arrived here and started looking at this problem. And we had, we were spending money and, we didn't have this money. And he mentioned at a Board of Selectmen's meeting that you at every opportunity, you need to look at areas where you can create revenue. And in this particular speech from Charlie, he says, every single penny counts. That resonates with me because I grew up, with a single parent. We struggled for everything that we had. Our vacations were bought with S&H green stamps. We counted every single penny. And I believe in that. I mean, that's the American way to me. So going forward, in looking at things, are we spending too much on office supplies? Are we spending too much on watering the grass in front of town hall? Just things like this. Where can we look at keeping, more of every penny? Thank you.
As I said, Lisa and I put together a lot of budgets together for a long time. And, attention to detail is really important as you construct a budget. But the same thing on the revenue side, I would meet with my department heads at least every other year to say, what do our fees look like compared to the universe of communities on the Cape? What's the cost of providing that service? Are our fees reflecting that? When Lisa and I first started in Brewster, the water department was subsidized by the tax levy by half. And so we looked at it as a enterprise fund, even though we didn't run it as an enterprise fund, but we looked at the full cost of providing services, healthcare benefits, indirect costs. And you really got to build these financial models and develop your revenues to reflect that, whether it be the marina or water, building department, conservation fees. And you've got to look at these fees really every other year. And I think that's one of the things that Rich and I have talked about that needs a lot of attention. I've worked on the water enterprise fund while I've been here, but there's a whole host of other areas that needs a lot of work, but it's manageable. You just develop a plan, prioritize those areas that you're going to focus on. And little things like when we were putting the budget together, you get a discount if you pay your county assessment in the beginning of the fiscal year. That discount is $35,000. You weren't taking advantage of that. You get a discount if you pay your general liability, your insurance package early, and that's several $1,000s. But that's what I mean about every single penny counts. We would absolutely take advantage of those because that's $7,000 that you can spend somewhere else on a program for your citizens. So, that's that exercise. The budgeting exercise is really important. In analyzing revenues, the cost of providing services is an elementary function that has to be done all the time.
Okay. Mr. Wolf, or actually Judith Thurn.
Thank you, ladies, and welcome. One thing I just want to correct, and thank you for all the specific investigations that you did to past articles. Question 11, you said it was about the 120,000 that went to the ballot and was voted on. We actually didn't vote on that. That was denied us. On night 2 of town meeting, we were told that it wasn't printed properly on the ballot, so it was going to be decided on at town meeting. And that disturbed me so much that I went into Dan Hort's office after that, and he said he had called the DOR. And as you said, the DOR is fairly lenient, I guess. And I think that was the last time you certified free cash. That's what he told me. And I have that person's name. So I went to FinCom at that point. When you said red flag should, I saw that and was told that they're just an advisory committee. And so really nothing happened. So I have just one question about leftover money, which I'm not an accountant, so I don't understand, but it seems to me, and this is the Wellfleet way. So that's what you've discovered, the Wellfleet way. But hopefully it's over. Thank you. But what would happen was we'd appropriate money at town meeting and then it wasn't used and it was put in all these wrong accounts and nobody could figure it out. So people just used it how they wanted to use it. I mean, that's the Wellfleet way. So,
Not anymore.
yeah, not anymore,
The
but
job of
it
the
was.
The job of the town accountant is to read the town meeting and and stick the people to that, whatever that
Right.
article says.
So,
So it's gonna be a
Dan
tough one.
Hort, who was Nick's boss's boss, was our TA at the time. And so I'd like to know when he was spoken to or interviewed, and Joe Powers and Harry Turkanian, and whether any of their contracts prevented you from, as you said, asking the questions, you were bound by certain bylaws or restrictions. Did you have any? And then lastly, I'd like to hear from Rebecca as to, I mean, this sounds like a human resource issue. Why were all these people leaving? There's a rumor of a toxic environment. What are we doing to improve that? And I assume you have something to say about that. Thank you.
I don't believe I said the Department of Revenue was lenient. I think I said they were cooperative and helpful. So, I think that's what I said. But I'm sure someone will check. Relative to, did we interview Harry Tarkanian? Well, the answer is Harry Tarkanian has been very helpful, and we have met with Harry on a number of issues over a period of time. And has been very helpful, particularly on housing issues and CPA issues. We did not interview and meet with Dan Hort or Joe Powers. And I think that for us, the detail work that we've done, and Mary talked about the granular, detailed nature, that's really what we needed to focus our energies on. And that's where the numbers sort of don't lie in these cases. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning of this, it was a snarled ball of yarn. And Lisa talked about missing links. That was broken threads for us, pieces of that ball of yarn. And we worked with a lot of diligence to chase those, to identify issues, to make corrections. That was really where value was in this product for us.
Chief Hurley?
I know a lot of the conversation tonight, don't touch, has been a lot of the past. And I just want, as a department head, where we've been moving forward the past year. I became chief in November of 2019, and to say it was a chaotic ride, it is being gentle, with the turnover, with accounting, with the treasurer, and really my staff, who some have been there longer than I have, really kept the train on the tracks. And as of even recent, the past year, the breath of fresh air in town, the communication almost weekly with accounting, Lisa, now Nick, has been phenomenal. I mean, I really can't say enough. Things are being fixed, communication is open, and we're dealing with things today instead of 6 months to a year from now. So I really think we're on a great track. We have a great blueprint, and we got good people that are coming on board. And as a department head, for the first time in a while, I'm excited. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Thank you.
Chief Polly?
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of comments. First of all, welcome. Mr. Waldo. Thank you to these three professionals who have worked very, very hard in the last 10 months. I can tell you I've been a fire chief since 1999 in 3 different communities. And I've never experienced what we experienced here in the last 2 years. Thanks to, again, hardworking town staff, our administrative professionals, police, fire, DPW, Shellfish, everyone else. We've come, around the bend now. But the accounting challenges and issues that we have faced in the last 2 years are unlike anything I have seen. I would echo Chief Hurley that we've got really great communication coming now from the town treasurer's office, town accountant's office. I'm on, I don't know, 12 or 13 town administrators in my career. I would hope that the press would listen clearly to what has been said tonight from our accounting people, our finance people, that there's just, there was no, I heard it at 2 o'clock this afternoon at lunchtime. Where's the $765,000? Where's that gone? And I had to again explain to a couple of taxpayers that it's not that way. It was a matter of missteps, mistakes, changing in accounting processes. And that is the truth. And I believe that to be the truth. And I will take exception to the Wellfleet way because you have a lot of hardworking department heads, staff here that are doing the job, have been doing the job. Do we make mistakes? Of course we make mistakes, but nothing was certainly ever intentional. It's been a rough couple of years for all of us. And I'll leave it at that, but thank you.
Tim Sayer.
Good evening, and thank you for all the hard work you did. I have a question about the short-term rental tax. We took in about $850,000 in that. 680,000 of it was designated by the select board to go to the Affordable Housing Trust. Is that money in there? Does it exist? That was the last article I've seen on it, was supposed to go to that. And we also will probably take in 1.2 million with a 2% raise, which would mean that we would take in over $1 million towards that trust. And I'm just wondering if you have that, if you've seen that money in the Affordable Housing Trust or not.
So that was a policy that was proposed to us. There's been no binding vote on it. We did refer the policy to the town administrator to refer to the various department heads and committees. As part of the plan or the development of the budget, those funds are not available to be transferred into the Affordable Housing Trust. Yeah, Charlie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think, yes, I agree with everything Ryan just indicated. So one of the things that I was immediately concerned about when I was hired in, May of 21 was the revenue plan that was generated to fund the operational budget for fiscal 2022, the current fiscal year. And the reality is that, for example, we had been using $1 million plus out of the beach fund, but the available monies in the beach fund, I think, were $694,000. So that's just one example of many problems with the financial plan that really didn't exist, because that normal process that should have happened in the winter of 21, we know was flawed. So in the end, the budget that was approved at the June 26, 2021 annual town meeting used every revenue source that you had just to balance that budget. And that included all of the new revenues from the room occupancy tax.
So we have $0 in the Affordable Trust thing that should have been that in theory was a non-binding resolution by the select board to put it into there. So there's really none of that money went into that fund.
By the way, you do have some money in that fund, but the board did not, they voted to investigate that and get input, but they never voted to carry out that.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I have talked to the board about, just one related issue, is in the financial forecast, where we've been using 100% of revenues almost that Mary talked about earlier in the presentation. In the financial plan for fiscal 2023, the upcoming fiscal year, I've backed that off to 85%. And then each year I'm decreasing that. So over time, I'm trying to free up some of those monies, pull them out of financing the general operating budget so that you can use them for other municipal purposes. But to unwind that is going to take time.
And I understand that. I just wondered and wanted to make it clear that really none of that money went in there. Thank you.
Mr. DeVasto?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that a little bit and sort of put some things in context in a way as far as the budget stuff, which I know we're going to get into next, right? And that is in 2019, when we were going through our 2020 budget, it was apparent that there was issues with one-time revenues, that we weren't raising enough. We hadn't done overrides for a long time, and we weren't bringing in enough revenue to keep up with 2.5%. And we had just taken money out of the ambulance fund. And, you know, while that budget process was going on, it was becoming apparent that we couldn't keep doing what we were doing. But, you know, February of that year, COVID was starting, and by March we had a shutdown. And the idea of asking for an override at that point just didn't seem like prudent. Like there wasn't enough there. And then Dan was on his way out at that time. So we had one town administrator with their foot out the door, and we were in the hiring process in the middle of COVID for the next town administrator. At that point, the select board did not have any inclination that there was accounting issues going on. It was not brought to our attention by any means. So going forward in that process, we hired the town administrator. The accountant was let go in October of that year in 2020, late 2020. We got various reports that there were issues with accountant, but we had no accountant in the office for months until Heather Mashad was on. The audit had been delayed. The previous audit was incomplete because that had also been delayed. So when we came into budgeting for 2021, the numbers just weren't really there to put together the budget. And the budget came into the select board just at the last minute. It was really just, I mean, everyone who probably saw that budget process coming from town administration understands that it was a mess. And so parting ways with that town administrator, having Chief Polly come in as interim town administrator, all within a very tight time frame to put that budget together. There was no way that we were going to come to the taxpayers and say, we need an override. We don't know what the numbers are. We don't know what's going on in our accounting office yet. We have Lisa here right now. The new town accountant just quit, and we have to put together a budget to operate the town. And that's why we said, okay, let's look at the stabilization fund, because we haven't had free cash certified in several years. We hadn't had free cash certified for 2 years at that point. So we were quite certain there would be some robust level of free cash when it could get certified, and that we'd be able to pay back that stabilization fund and have this conversation about our structural budget problem, which is that we haven't kept up with the 2.5%. The costs exceeding 2.5% to operate town government. And I think it's important to note that we've been
Mike,
operating.
let's try to stick to the Mary and Lisa's report, because we are going to go over the budget.
Sure, we were just talking about the budget,
Yep.
so I'm just putting it into context, and I'll be quick. I'll wrap it up quickly. But yeah, it's just important to put into context where we are right now and how we need to actually restructure the way we're doing business, because the cost of town government has gone up by more than 2.5% per year. And we have not had an override, and we've been paying for it in other ways by debt exclusions. So one way or the other, we're paying for it. It doesn't make sense to pay interest on things.
Okay. Are there any other questions about how the town had been handling its finances and the work that's been done by Mary and Lisa? I'd also like to remind anybody that's on Zoom, if they use the raise hand function, you know, you'll be recognized and you can speak to whatever your question is as well. So Mr. Wolf?
Yeah. This has been kind of a big deal for me, looking at what's going on. Going forward, it's occurred to me that our problems, not just financial, but also other aspects of the operation of various town departments, personnel issues, and so forth, has partly been the result of lack of communication up and down the chain of command. No regular meetings, no regular communication between members of, employees of town departments and the department heads, between department heads and the town administrator, and so forth. It strikes me that this is one of the things that is crucial to change going forward. Not only in financial reporting, but in all aspects of town government, that we have regular interdepartment meetings and then regular meetings between department heads and Rich Waldo, and then regular updates between Rich Waldo and the select board to maintain the chain of command and communications between all parts of the chain of command. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Yes.
Yeah, just a sort of standard practice, really. And, and I would say I worked with Rich. I was the interim town manager in Provincetown for 8 months, back in 20, I guess. And Rich is used to a culture that has exactly that.
So in defense of the previous comment about the Wellfleet way, I would say that this lack of communication and the resulting lack of transparency could be characterized as the Wellfleet way because it's gone on for so long.
How long do you think it's gone on for? Because we're talking about 2019
Well, I
till
think it's
now.
gone on
You think,
quite some time before that, and this is what the culmination of it, and that's why I'm really encouraged at what I'm hearing about the change in that culture.
So the department heads have always had a robust communication between themselves. The breakdown was occurring between administration and the departments themselves, and was not really reflective of the department heads and the performance of their departments. I just want to make that very clear. They all support each other constantly. They work very hard, and they have a lot of overlap, and they're always talking to each other, even in the absence of, I would say, leadership from town administration in the past, and that should not occur going forward.
Right. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear that I'm not referring to the departments as they're currently functioning. I'm talking about going back and.
Yeah, they've communicated for a period of time. Helen?
Yeah, just a little institutional memory here. Up until maybe a couple of years before the pandemic, the select board would get a monthly report from each department. Now, that was yet another chore for a department. And the departments were communicating to each other horizontally in minutes, in meetings rather. But it was very useful. And that was around the time that sort of fell apart, the process fell apart at around the time that those 3 initial longstanding employees retired, which happened within 2 years. I checked with Don Rickman about that. I didn't bring my notes on that. But once again, nobody was being lazy. Nobody was being stupid. It's just all a lot. And we need to support each other and ask each other for information and require it at times and want it. And also have a keen sense of how overwhelmed people can be and address that in a supportive way, not like, oh, you bad people, but like, hey, we need to hear about this. Let's not forget about it. Do it. Thank you.
Mr. DeVasto?
yeah, I completely disagree that you could characterize the way that Wellfleet has run throughout the years as the Wellfleet way by what's happened over the last 2 years in the pandemic and 2019. Both Ms. Ahern and John, I just think that's a gross mischaracterization of the way this town has functioned and has been a great community. and has actually been quite a frugal community in the way that it's run its government. And we've had issues for the last 3 years, and we've, as quickly as municipal government can function, gotten those issues fairly resolved and are on a path towards a brighter future for the town. And I think probably be in a better situation than we were prior to the pandemic and prior to the accounting issues. So I just want to say that for the record, that's a gross mischaracterization of the Wellfleet way.
Mr. Sumner?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to go back to the beginning of my presentation. And what I talked about was department heads and their critical staff, how helpful and cooperative they have been of our efforts. And I've talked about this at select board meetings in the past. The way I see them interacting on emergency planning, weather events, I praise them because they deserve it. And I think I indicated during my initial comments that the reason the town has continued to function and provide services is because of the dedication of these department heads and their support staff. So.
Okay, Ms. Ern?
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. I want to clarify about the Wellfleet Way. These people have explained that they were only tasked with doing the last 2 years. But when Gene Ferrari appeared before FinCom in December 2019, he explained this was the problem for years and years and years before. This is how it's done. So that was the way things were done in Wellfleet. And I'm calling it the Wellfleet Way. So yes, let's all move forward. But like I said, I'd really like to hear from our assistant TA, who's our human resource manager. I'd like to know why these people left. Such a beautiful town as you described that we all love. Heather Michaud, I talked to her the day she left. So that is the Wellfleet Way, and a lot of people feel that way. So for the record.
Fred? Yep.
In 2019, the Finance Committee was not used to getting the town accountant at our meetings. It just wasn't something that ever happened. And we could speak to why that may be. Historically, it doesn't really matter. We invited Gene Ferrari, who is new to the job, to come as a getting to know you, get to know us kind of thing. And what he said at that meeting was, he's in very deep water. He was trying to figure out how he was going to reconcile the old books with a new chart of accounts. And that was the last we heard of Gene until the following fall. But all he was really saying was he had a huge job to do and he wasn't sure how he was going to manage to get it done. That was the sum of it.
And in 2019, after Vadar.
As he was trying to implement it.
Exactly, late 2019.
Yeah, and then I guess, Rebecca, would you care to speak to any, human resources training? Yeah, I know that you can't speak to anything that happened before you were here, but.
So with all the new contracts that I've been initiating with Nick and Cameron, I have it mandatory that they have to go to training. Before April of 21, I wasn't here. So the other staff members that were mentioned, I just wasn't here. So I can't speak to that. And I also can't talk about confidential employee matters. So
Thank you.
that's it.
All right, John, but then we need to get to the budget.
Just want to make it clear, I'm not talking about what's going on currently as the Wellfleet Way. And I'm not talking really about the last 2 years. I'm well aware of the effect the pandemic has had and the work you all were doing in spite of that. I'm talking about the last 2 years perhaps being the culmination of many years of lax practices, failure to communicate, and so forth. And I'm I'm very encouraged that that is in the past. I'm not, the Wellfleet Way may have been, it's not what we are dealing with now. And that, I just want to make it clear that I'm not calling our current state of affairs the Wellfleet Way. I'd like to say that this is the new Wellfleet way, a way of competence, communication, and responsibility and transparency. That's what I see as being the current and future Wellfleet way.
Charlie?
Now, are we now on the agenda item, the relative to the town being update?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Or no, the budget.
Budget.
Oh, the override issue?
Yeah, the
Oh, thanks.
override.
Okay, yep. I have like two piles going here. Okay, so in closing, you know, I guess when I wanted to talk a little bit about the override. Now, Mary had sort of discussed this in a preliminary way when she talked about the use of local receipts and a use of local receipts that has expanded in a significant way over the last few years. And remember, when we finalized the town budget for the current fiscal year, we had to do some extreme measures at the last moment at town meeting. We had to use, I think, $629,000 out of the stabilization fund just to balance the budget for the current fiscal year. And then earlier speaker had mentioned, oh, what happened with the new room occupancy tax revenue? We had to use that to finance the current municipal budget. What happened with the new monies from the marijuana licenses that were issued in the town? We had to use those funds to finance the current fiscal year budget. And so, you know, that's the reality of that. Now, when I prepared the 5-year revenue and expenditure forecast relative to the current municipal budget, and remember, I talked about reducing our reliance on local receipts. I've done that in this financial forecast. But in order to be able to provide services that have existed in the past, you need an operating override. You need an operating override because of all of the things that we've already talked about, the use of one-time revenues, the heavy reliance of your local receipts to finance the budget. You've the shelves, you know, all those cans of food in the shelves, all the staples, they're empty. You've used every single revenue stream to finance municipal operations. And, you know, there's a part of me that I understand why that occurred. You know, Mr. DeVasto talked about the pandemic and the uncertainty that was occurring. But these practices that have put you in this position have been going on for a few years. You know, whether it's the use of the ambulance fund or the CMATch fund or the beach fund to the levels that you have strained your ability to finance municipal operations going forward. So anyway, when we put the budget together for the current fiscal year, the reality is that we need an operating override. So the operating override is a permanent increase in the property tax levy. And that's question number 1 on the ballot. That's I'm going to round, but that's $519,000. We're asking, and question number 1, we're asking for a Proposition 2.5 override of the property tax levy to fund general school and town operations for the new fiscal year. And it's because of all of the things that we've talked about here tonight that you need that. Now, if the voters decide that no, they're not going to finance that override, the option is we have to cut municipal services. Now those cuts are identified in Article number 2. Article number 1 is the operating budget that maintains services as you know it in the current fiscal year going forward. Budget number 2 cuts that $519,000 out of that budget. And we're going to be having a couple of meetings coming up with the Wellfleet Forum. I'm sure the chair will be talking about that to talk about the details of that cut. Now, on top of that, if you looked, I took a look at the last 5 years of overrides that the town of Wellfleet has had, and you've had a number of debt exclusions, and that's fine. When you agreed to build your share of the Cape Cod Tech, the Nauset High School renovation project, those are debt exclusions. They're an increase in your property tax levy. And that taxing authority lasts as long as the bond payments are due, most cases 25 to 30 years for large projects of that nature. So once the high school is paid off, the Cape Cod Tech is paid off, that authority to increase the tax levy is eliminated going forward. Now, the other types of overrides that you've had in your warrant is you've had a number of short-term borrowings to buy police cruisers, to buy dump trucks, to fix your municipal buildings, to buy equipment. So you've had, like last year, we had 11 what really were debt exclusions to borrow money for a 3 to a 5 year period to buy this equipment. So, and then there's been many other years that you've had multiple debt exclusions to buy and replace equipment. And so it's been a laundry list of items that have been in the warrant and people make decisions. What I'm suggesting as a course of action under Article number 2 is a permanent increase in the property tax levy of $672,700. Now, $200,000 of that is monies to pay for the town's future liabilities for your OPEB fund. We want to recreate the funding for that important liability for the town. The balance, which is about $473,000, is monies to buy and replace equipment items that are on the warrant for June 11, 2023. And the reason I'm suggesting what I call a capital or special projects override is that, you know, this year we're going to buy the items that are in the warrant. Next year, there's going to be other pieces of equipment to replace, other buildings to repair. So if the town is willing to approve question number 2, the select board by policy should reserve those monies for capital equipment replacement as a matter of policy. Now, there could be a year, let's say fiscal 2024, where the town only, the departments only ask for $300,000 in equipment. What I would say to the board is appropriate the full appropriation of $473,000. If you don't spend the money, put it into a capital equipment stabilization fund. So you can start planning out some of these major equipment replacements in town. And I think you can, by using this type of a system, you can eliminate some of these spikes in your spending when you have large pieces of equipment. And the other thing is, you know, in a way it's worked out, right? Borrowing costs have been historically low for the last few years. So you've been, you know, borrowing at extremely low cost. I don't think we should rely on that going forward, is what I'm recommending, because I think the landscape is changing and our borrowing costs are going to increase. So that's what I'm up to there. Now, the other thing I will say, this has been a conversation about talking about, problems and issues that have occurred here in Wellfleet. We also have 2 other questions on the ballot, override questions. One is to hire 2 new police. Question number 3 is to hire 2 new police officers. And that is in the amount of $187,000. And the question number 4 is an override to hire 2 new firefighter paramedics. That's $207,000. That's been a practice of the town. When you create new positions of this magnitude, you've gone to the voters and say, hey, we think the town needs these services for many good reasons. And you've asked the voters for a permanent increase in the Proposition 2.5 override. So that's been, I think, a good policy and practice that the town has adhered to for several years. And we're doing it again this year. Now, we'll be talking about next week during a couple of forums, the need for these positions. I won't go into that tonight. And then question number 5 is a debt exclusion. It's a temporary increase in the property tax levy for $2.2 million. And it's to pay costs associated with installing a fire suppression system in the Wellfleet Elementary School. So anyway, those are the overrides that you have. But I think if you think about where you've been, the financial stability, the financial foundation of the town's municipal operations have been destabilized for the last few years. And these are, particularly question number 1 and 2, these are 2 steps that I think will put you in a good position going forward. I think then obviously between the Finance Committee and the Select Board, there's a heightened sense of awareness imparted by the community members to make sure that the proper best practices for municipal operations are going to be adhered to, and that I'm sure the Select Board and the Finance Committee are going to ask the new town administrator for frequent updates, and that's going to occur. But we have an unstable fiscal condition relative to the operating and the capital budget. And the only way to remedy those, there's 2 solutions. We can ask the voters to provide additional monies via a Proposition 2.5 override so we can maintain municipal operations and replace equipment, or you've got to make some drastic cuts in your budget. And you're still going to be stuck with a situation where you have no money to replace capital equipment. Now, ultimately, we will be completely done and free cash will be certified. And I suspect that you're going to have a solid free cash certification basis. And at that time, depending upon what that certification is, we need to replace the stabilization fund. We have a number of our, special funds that need to be stabilized. And that's the first priority for the stabilization fund. And then I think relative to what that number might be, some of those funds could then be used to fund housing, free up some money for housing and provide a backstop if you have a revenue shortfall somewhere. Lisa and I used to sort of do it as we put 1/3 into our reserves. We used 1/3 to finance equipment replacement, and we kept 1/3 as a rainy day backstop. So that's all I got to say.
Sure. So there's a few things. One is in October, when we set the tax rate for this coming, or for this, when we set the tax rate, we adjusted the residential tax exemption and the expectation that, an override was coming. The residential tax exemption on a median priced home went from, the residential tax exemption went from 20% to 25%. So on a median priced home, if the override is under $830,000 approximately, the residents themselves will not really see an increase in their effective tax. So it's a way of buffering the override's impact on residents. In terms of how levy or the tax levy is arrived at, there is the annual 2.5%, which you're allowed by Mass General Law, and then the other component of the tax levy is new growth. New growth is primarily produced by new developments or houses being built or reconstructed. Over the last number of years, that activity has decreased, especially as the town has been approaching build out. There's not really very many more significant parcels that are suddenly being developed. The actual number of building permits peaked in 2014 and has decreased in the years subsequent to that. So over time, the amount of new growth has been decreasing. And it's also, but I just wanted to make that clear. In terms of so there's effectively two separate overrides that are being proposed. One is just to fund the town's operations as they currently exist, which is the operating override. The other one is the capital, basically the capital, what establishes a capital budget for the town of Wellfleet. We have a capital improvement plan, but we don't have a budget for a capital currently. So we've been, and more things have been getting moved from operating expenses into capital items. We've had, replacement of the police's bulletproof vest, which Kevlar expires after a certain number of years. It loses its certification. We have that as a borrowing item. And it's things like that is just like, that's part of what they need to operate their services. And on top of that, why are we paying interest on something like that? So it might make the overall impact seem less in 1 year, but it's like, using a credit card effectively. You putting money, you're only paying part of the bill, and then you have to pay the rest of the bill plus the interest. And over time, that has served to increase the effective amount of money that is placed as a burden on the taxpayer, as opposed to having a certain amount that's, in the budget for capital items that then you don't need to pay interest on. So that is basically what we're proposing for the capital exclusion. But Mr. DeVasto, and then.
Yeah, everything, I reiterate what Ryan just said is what I was going to say, but also to add to that, when these capital reserve funds are available, so that there's a capital reserve fund feasibly on monies that are left over each year from that budget when there is cash left over. But anytime these capital items come to be spent, they still have to be appropriated and approved at town meeting. So it's not like giving a blanket check to buy capital items. Everything that is spent will still have to go to town meeting and get voted on. The difference will be that there'll be money there to pay for it rather than a borrowing article to do so. And it's really just the way we're structuring how we're paying for things, because we're approving these things at town meeting every year. All the debt exclusions, everything passed last year, much to my surprise because of the turbulence we had in our financial departments. I was pretty nervous that we weren't going to get that stuff through, and many of those items we really needed, but they passed. So we're paying for that. And so this is really about how we structure our budget and how we pay for the things, not whether we're going to pay for the things we need. We seem to do that every year.
Ms. Wilson?
Thank you. So we've got the first article for, as Ryan was very clear about, we have one that will give us normal services, and then we have what happens if we don't pass that one. And I have to say, sitting through the meeting where the department heads went through what kind of cuts they would have to do was brutal. Even I, who, sometimes think, why do they need another car? I listen to that and my hair stood on end. So those very specific cuts that the department heads had to look at in order to be able to have the contingency warrant article, for us to vote on. I just wish that everybody that would think we're spending too much money on the first one could have listened to that. I also want to correct or add to one thing that Ryan laid out a lot of facts that, thank you. But one of the things you said was with the residents, that is to say year-round residents, not what are often referred to residents can include non-resident taxpayers. But in this case, it refers to residents who live here year-round, more than 184 days, they only get the number that Ryan gave if they apply for an exemption. Not everybody will. And in the meantime, the money has to come from somewhere. So people that don't apply for it or who are not living here year round would have their taxes go up a bit or a lot, depends. It's just very important to remember that. Thank you.
Yeah, the increase is really small on non-residents. Has to do with the overall makeup of the town's constructed buildings, or not constructed buildings, homes, I would say. And the town has basically 79% of the town's homes were non-resident homes. So that means that only 21% of the homes are actually occupied by permanent residents. But so the overall increase is really small for those non-residents. But Mr. Moderator, Danny Silverman.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to this team for the work you've done and for the information you've provided tonight. I want to ask two questions, if I might, because I'm hoping that there are a lot of people watching this presentation, and I think it's important that 2 points be made very clearly. The first, and if you could answer, like yes or no, I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of conflating in people's minds about the fact that this bookkeeping fiasco, if you will, has come to a head at the same time that our budget practices have been revealed to be less than standard. And I think there's a feeling in people's minds that why we need the override, why we have a budget issue is because our books are messed up. And can you state very clearly that if our books had been balanced to the penny, that we would still need an override to go forward and to maintain the services that we have? Is that an accurate statement?
It is absolutely an accurate statement.
I think it's very important.
This override, these overrides, I would be proposing them even if there were not a financial management crises.
Okay, and I think it's very important that people understand that. The other thing that I think it's important for people to understand is that the budget issues, the need for an override, the need to establish a capital stabilization fund to fund our municipal operations in a way that's different than the way we've been doing it for many years didn't just happen overnight. That this is the result of long-term budget policies on the part of past boards of selectmen, select boards rather, past finance committees going back many, many years. I've been here for a long time. I was a department head. I've been involved in town government for a long time. And I'd like to hear you say that this is not something that just happened, that Wellfleet has been somewhat of an outlier in terms of the way it manages its municipal budget. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm comfortable saying that, that for a long time, we have been an outlier in terms of how we fund municipal services. And I think it's finally come home to roost. I'm hoping that the voters recognize that we need to pay for the services that we want and that we need to maintain the buildings that we own. We need to maintain the infrastructure we have. And you can't do it with single one-time revenues. You can't do it by rating these special purpose funds. You have to be willing to be honest with the voters and saying, this is what it costs to operate the municipal services. And at the moment, this is what it takes. Most other towns do overrides, I think as Ms. McIsaac said, on a regular basis. And that's something that we haven't done. So I'm hoping going forward that that's the way we're going to operate. And I would love confirmation from you that, that what I'm saying isn't off the mark.
Yeah, and well, you've stated it accurately. And I will tell you in our conversation, Mary and Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but in our conversations with the Department of Revenue, the way you finance capital equipment replacement is unusual. it's not common, it's not the best practice. So it is unusual. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it is not common out there. And I would also say that when Lisa and the problem is Lisa and I work together way too long, but when we did our financial, we were exhausted, we had to retire, but when we prepared our financial forecast, I think Mary probably went through the same experience. We had a deliberate process to say, there comes a point in time when you need an operational override, and you don't cut facility repairs, you don't cut equipment replacement to maintain services. If the town doesn't want to maintain those services and rejects an override, you've got to cut municipal operations, because you still got to put a roof on a building. You still got to buy a cruiser. You have to buy a snow plow truck or a fire truck. So, it's frequent and common. I know Orleans just had an operational override. I know Eastham just had an operational override. They have a robust financial planning process, and they ask the voters early, hey, if you want to maintain your services, this is what we need to do that. They don't ravage their accounts, their special purpose accounts. They don't eliminate equipment repair and replacement. That's, I many times in Brewster, I'd say, hey, we need I don't know, 2008 or whatever we did it. We needed an $800,000 operational override. And I had some people say, let's not replace that piece of equipment. Let's not fix that building. And I said, okay, well, we can not do those projects, but we still have an $800,000 deficit in operations, because we still have to cut municipal operations, because that truck is going to have to be replaced that year, the next year. Those windows are going to have to be replaced the following year. That's not going to go away. So anyway, it's an opportunity to reset fiscal operations, to stabilize municipal operations, and to do it in a responsible way. Now, there are some opportunities going forward. I had mentioned it, to look at other revenues to deal with problems. And those are the things you do to make your operational overrides happen only every few years. So,
Okay.
lots to be done.
I'll get to both of you in 1 second. The other thing that I just want to make clear, the contingency budget, it's not less stuff that is included in that. It's less of the things that people want and rely on. It's the library will be closed today. The afternoon or rec won't have afternoon programs. They'll only have morning programs. A day at the transfer station would get cut. The voucher, the childcare vouchers, or the pre-K vouchers would there would be a substantial cut to them as well. So I want to make it clear, it's not less stuff. It's less of what people need and rely on. And it's less staff, less personnel, less services. We sometimes bundle everything into this term of services, and it's not really clear what that necessarily means and what that results in. When we say less services, it's kind of a generic term. And I just want to make it really clear that it's things that people need and rely on. So thank you. Mr. DeVasto.
Yeah, I just wanted to go over kind of what Charlie said too about the way we've been spending and putting things in debt exclusions and the number of debt exclusions that have increased over the years, because we did that in the past, and it really, if you want to talk about the Wellfleet way, it's been avoiding general operating overrides and avoiding raising property taxes and being very frugal with how we spend our money, paying less than most municipalities, not maintaining our buildings, all in the name of not having overrides. And a lot of that was able to be avoided by the fact that we had robust new construction throughout the 80s and 90s that added to the levy. And as that waned, I mean, we haven't had a subdivision in this town in, I think 7 years was the last time there was approved subdivision. And I think it was only like 7 lots or something like that. And that's when, and the cost of government dramatically increased over that time period as well, above 2.5%. And that's really when we started, when we should have looked at it and said, we need to look at changing our policy, because it has been the policy of select boards to not have general operating overrides. And I think Danny can attest to that. And do you remember the last time we had a general operating override in the town of Wellfleet? How many years it's been? I think I heard we had one about a decade ago for $25,000 or something like that. But that no one knows. No one knows the last time we had one, because it has been the policy to not increase things above 2.5% in order to keep property taxes low. And we've done a good job of that as a municipality. Our property tax rate is low generally, but we've paid for a lot of stuff through debt exclusions over the last 4 or 5, 6 years. And we're paying for that up front right now. So.
Mr. Wolf?
Yeah, I just wanted to address a perception on the part of, and this is just what I hear from talking to people and keeping my ear to the ground, that there's a desire out there to, in effect, punish for perceived, whatever you want to call it, malfeasance or dereliction or whatever. I think it should be apparent to anyone listening to the presentation earlier tonight that we've had an excellent team of people doing excellent work to identify these problems, come up with the solutions to correct them, and put in place what we need going forward. And that if we vote down these overrides, the only people we will be hurting is ourselves. You will be hurting yourself, your neighbor, us, our visitors. To amplify something Ryan was saying a few minutes ago, yes, services that we all depend on will be cut, including lifeguards at the beach. We will be having to curtail those services early, and that can put people in danger. We rely on these things. In addition, particularly dealing with question 2, we know this is all very well established through municipal experience. We have recurring expenses. We know that a police car lasts X amount of years, and we know exactly what that time frame is and that it will have to be replaced. We know that a front end loader at the DPW, after a certain number of years, the maintenance costs and repair costs exceed there's a point of diminishing returns, and we know where that is approximately. If we plan for it, I couldn't agree more with my colleague Mike DeVasto that to rely on debt exclusions is penny wise and pound foolish, especially now that the Fed, we know this going forward, the Fed is going to continue increasing interest rates. It will no longer be so cheap to borrow money. So keep these things in mind when you vote, and when you vote at town meeting, and when you vote at the following election, that we and you depend on these services. We and you depend on financial and fiscal responsibility, replacing vehicles before they begin to eat holes in our pockets. We have lost personnel in our police department. We need to replace them in order to maintain the level of safety that we've come to expect. Same thing with our fire and EMS. So let's put thoughts of punishing past perceived misdeeds. That's not going to be productive going forward. We've had a top-notch team of people helping us change course. We have top-notch people who are going to help us maintain that course going forward. So let's pull together and do this. Thank you.
Okay, Fred?
Thank you. I'm going to try to be super brief here if I can, which is almost impossible, as you know, Charlie. I think there's two areas where I think you guys have performed a really good service in the narrative here. One is by clearly delineating operating from capital concerns. So when the finance committee looks at capital budgets, for example, the police budget, there's a certain symmetry to it. Every year, a new cruiser shows up because that's the replacement schedule for that. Not every department has such a symmetrical, synchronous way of going after capital stuff, but overall, the idea of a capital reserve fund or whatever, or a stabilization fund, in a sense, addresses that problem. Operating, as most people know, is, pick a number, 80 to 90% people. You know, when we talk about saving on staplers, we're not really talking about saving very much money. It's people, and then the OPEB is sort of an indirect piece of that. You're paying unfunded liabilities of people who aren't here anymore, but that is the bulk of it. And those numbers go up year over year over year. So if you lay them against Prop 2.5, the two together, it's a nice guideline, but nobody's home budget, for example, follows a direct line up 2.5%. There's years where you spend more and less. So maybe you get a reserve fund together or something like that. The other piece, though, that I think has been illuminated by this process, assuming we get back onto stable footing and assuming we do the right thing and that we have our processes in place and we communicate and the reports are accurate, is that there is the longer term stuff, the town we want to be in 5 to 10 years, with some huge potential costs associated with those, like a sewer system or not. Those kinds of things, which we hear about in the finance committee every year. You know, the wastewater people come in and they say, if you don't do this, you got to spend that much. And there are 4 or 5 things like that. I'd be curious to know, either based on your experience in Bruce or your experience here in Wellfleet, how you, aside from having a good planning function, how you anticipate and prepare the populace to say, you know what, these are Prop 2.5 busters that are 3 years out, 5 years out, but they're coming and you can't get away from them.
Charlie, before you answer that, can I actually ask Rich Waldo to field it first? And then,
Well, you know, it's funny. I'm gonna kind of go back a little bit and just say, you know, as I look across the room here, I see the importance of what a strong administrative team looks like and the need for it and the repercussions of a void of not having it. As I attend my first day as a town administrator, my first official day of my career as a town administrator, I look across the room and I see Charlie here 39 years. But I will say that everything that was spoken tonight, everything in that presentation, there's nothing that I don't understand or it doesn't sit well. You know, it is a lot of the basic fundamentals of running a town. And I know Nick and I know Cameron, and we're going to follow basically the hard work that you've done moving forward. And I think Wellfleet has a real opportunity here to close the door on the path, or close the door on the past, but open a new door for the future of Wellfleet. And I think it's very important, particularly with those overrides. In terms of what happens with those overrides, what happens with the vote on June 11th, and what happens in 5 years from now, I think a lot of it was discussed tonight about being able to have these regular updates, to be able to talk throughout the departments, try to anticipate what those future costs might be, what those future capital projects might look like, and be able to relay that up to the top, to the select board and back down to the finance committee, and really discuss that so we can kind of put together a robust 5-year capital program, maybe venture into a 10-year capital program, look at those little different strategies so we can have a better picture of what that future looks like. I think today, we got to rebuild today. I think on June 10th, June 11th, we need to really act to get ourselves on stable footing so we can move forward. So that's my answer to that.
okay. Charlie?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is as Richard just talked about, when you look at that 5 and even 10 years out there, there's a way to look at where you're starting to retire debt. You know, you have a fair amount of debt already. And, you know, the way most of these bond issues are issued, they're declining debt payments, but there's a way to try to manage these funds, so you're going to be adding new debt as you're retiring old debt. And that's where having, you know, a solid stabilization fund and capital funds, you can use that to buffer the impacts of some of these projects for a period of time. So, you know, there's strategies to manage it. And then also, I mean, I'll just tout Rich Waldo's one. I mean, you look at the number of capital projects on the wastewater, the water infrastructure, and development downtown in taking advantage of grant opportunities. And so you got to, between Rebecca Ruffley and Rich Waldo, you got a team that has good skills in this area, obtaining grants and financial assistance to help in these projects. So.
All right. Anything else regarding the budget or the proposed overrides?
I guess one more thing, just to Fred's question, is that we're lucky to be in a position right now with these major infrastructure things coming down our road, that the federal government has just released a $1 trillion infrastructure bill that, you know, if we have our ducks in a row, I mean, they're looking for projects like this, and we haven't had that type of federal investment in the United States in decades. So, I mean, one can hope, but I think with the team we have with Rich here, who has a lot of experience, and having Rebecca here, we're really we have a good future in front of us if we play our cards right. So.
Okay. So 2020 annual town meeting, or 2022, sorry, going back in time.
Exit, stage left.
I'm gonna let Mary and Lisa escape. They have a
Yep.
longer drive than I do even. Thank you, Mary and Lisa.
Yeah, and thank you for all the hard work that,
You
that
guys are a star.
Yeah.
Are you
Yep.
sure? Good.
Nobody's raised their hand on
No.
Zoom?
No.
My wife just texted me. But she wants to make sure I'm okay. Okay, I just want to give you a brief update on some town meeting items. So we have a team, Dan, myself, Jennifer Conjal, our town clerk, Nick Robinson, our town accountant. Am I missing someone? No. Yeah, thanks. We have been all in town council. We've all been working to develop the motion booklet for the annual town meeting. And that's almost complete. We have one more meeting tomorrow, I believe, to finalize that, and the motion booklet will be done and we'll go to print, and those will be available to the public. Well, once we get that finished, we'll also put it on the website too. Now, so that's in good shape. Now, I just wanted to indicate under Article number 5, which was the capital article, there were 3 items on there that were going to be funded if we had free cash. You know, I feel bad, but I didn't get to the finish line to get free cash certified for the annual town meeting. So we don't have any free cash. So those are going to be the bandstand awning project for $50,000, the water refill stations for $20,000, the Briar Lane culvert for $75,000. Those items will have to be indefinitely postponed at town meeting. We don't have money for those. Hold on a sec. Don't give me a chance. Because I'm going to come back to that. And then also we had some other articles that were funded by free cash. Article 14 is the stabilization fund. That will have to be postponed. Article 19 was the harbor fauna and flora study. That'll have to be postponed. These are all things for free cash. In Keller's Corner, Article 25, Keller's Corner revetment project. No free cash. We can't present those to town meeting. Now, most of those can wait until the fall when we have free cash certified. The Briar Lane culvert can't. We need to move forward with that project. So we got two things going on here. We're going to apply to use some Chapter 90 monies to get the engineering going on that ASAP. So while it won't be funded via town meeting, we'll use Chapter 90 to deal with that project. The Keller's Corner revetment project, if you remember from the grant award from NRCS, the biggest part of the grant award for NRCS was the Herring River Restoration Project, but also Powers Landing, Keller's Corner, and another project that I can't remember right now. Were all funded through that, that grant award. So anyway, those projects will continue to move along.
So at some point, can that grant award be presented to the board?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's all I really have for the annual town meeting. I don't know.
Well,
if-
Yeah, three other items real quickly. The first is you've town clerk or Rebecca advertised more than 7 days ahead of time. I would ask you for a vote to reduce the quorum to 100, as we've done for our past two meetings. That requires a vote by the Board of Select, by the Select Board after consultation with the moderator. So I'm consulting with you and
Yep.
and advising that you lower the
So
quorum
that's
to 100.
advertised for the 7th, correct? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that was on for tonight.
Yep. There's a
Okay.
number of town meeting things on the 7th.
Okay.
Just so everybody's aware, I'm trying to avoid having the select board meeting the morning before town meeting, unless somebody wants to bring us all breakfast. I don't want to be stuck at the ball field all day. I mean, we're going to be there all day already, but you know.
My mistake. I'm sorry. I
No,
thought
no,
that
no
was on.
worries.
The other two items real quickly, and we can, I would like if the select board would adopt the same practice that we've used for the past two meetings where the chair of the board and the vice chair make all of the primary motions and second those motions. I think it just makes the meeting go a little faster. And with the motions booklet, with all the voters having the motions booklet in hand, we can avoid having to read all the motions. There will be a statement that says, I move that article such and such be approved with the wording of the motion to be as printed in the motions booklet. And I'll provide you a cheat sheet for that. But I think that's worked well in the past to move the meeting along. The third thing is, if this wasn't specifically on your agenda tonight, but I did talk to Suzanne and she gave me the okay to ask the board to authorize a giveaway of 5 beach stickers at the end of the meeting as a reward to the people who have stayed there and helped us maintain our quorum. So if you can vote on that tonight, if not on the 7th, but I need to know before town meeting. So thank you. That's all.
Yeah, we can vote on it tonight. I have it on the agenda for the 7th, but that's fine.
Okay,
For
either.
tonight as well. It's covered under the agenda item.
Okay,
So,
if you're willing.
so I move that the Board of Selectmen authorizes the town moderator to, is it drawing or?
It's a drawing. It's not a raffle.
Yeah.
I was brought up short on that a number of years ago.
I move to authorize the town moderator to have a drawing for 5 beach stickers for voters at the end of the annual town meeting.
Helen second.
Okay, can I have a roll call vote, please?
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Michael, I.
Ryan, I.
Helen, I.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Wait, don't we have to vote on the lower quorum or have we already?
No, he
that's
just said-
Doing that
advertised
on
for
the 7th.
On the 7th. He
Oh,
just-
so all the rest of it is advertised for the 7th.
The quorum, you for
All
to
the
have
other-
a modified quorum, you have to advertise it in a paper and common circulation. And so that's advertised for the 7th, and there's a number of different agenda items related to town meeting for the 7th.
Those other ones.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
See you tomorrow.
See you
So-
tomorrow.
Can we move to adjourn?
Um,
New business.
Oh,
Yeah, new business. I don't think there is any.
no, please
Uh,
not.
Okay, John.
I got one anyway. Also a reminder that I will have a policy for the town building, use of town building thing. I'll have that ready for,
Yep, I have that on the agenda for the 7th.
okay. It's been brought to my attention that our former board member Janet Reinhardt was the board's liaison with the dredging task force. I'd like to ask that, I'd like to be made that liaison. What's the proper process for doing that?
It just has to go on the agenda and then
Okay.
we can vote for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
All right, I'll
that's,
put it on the agenda
yeah.
for the 7th.
and then anyone else who wants to do it puts their name forward too. And then it's just the same sort of thing as a reorganizing kind of, but
Okay.
usually only one person wants to do something extra. I don't think we're gonna have a fight over it.
So, Mr.
and
Chairman,
Ryan?
are there, Mr. Chairman,
Yep.
are there liaisons to all the boards and committees?
No, there is not.
Might we give some thought in the future to having liaisons to some committees that aren't currently?
Sure,
authorized?
sure.
Thank
We,
you.
we can, there are certain ones that they're kind of our liaisons, but not really.
We kind of do it from time to time, depending on what's going on
Yep.
in the committee.
Like with
right?
finance or?
So other committee
Just-
liaisons.
Yeah.
So Ryan?
Once,
Don't look at me like that.
okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so there was an agenda item on here about delegating at least one of us to go to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to go.
Okay,
So, but I'm not delegating. I mean, this is for Linda Balch's
Yep.
going away thing, so,
if you can do that, that would be great.
but I think other people should go too. That's all I'm saying.
I-
And the other thing is, through you to Ms. Carboni, it has worked very well, given that we now have select board reports on all our regular meetings, because you go and you retrieve information and you sort of tell it in the report. And in the past, the liaison designations often kind of got uninhabited. Do you see what I'm saying? It's a good thing, but
Let's not try to debate it right now.
no, because it's
so
not on
it's
the
a-
agenda.
yep. 1 second, Mike.
Sure. I'm just letting you know, I'm not. trying to jump in.
There is one thing that, we need an executive session. We still have a collective bargaining agreement to go before town meeting,
And we have minutes.
and we have minutes. So I'd like to try to have it on the 7th at 6. I know it's a big time commitment, but it's, to me, it's less disruptive than having, additional meetings.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna take that long because we've already been through most of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's fine
so
with
can you
me.
post a meeting for the 7th at 6? At 6. Mike?
I just wanted to also say that there's gonna be 2 community forums. I guess this is
Oh,
an
yep.
announcement, but 2 community forums. One is pre-town meeting. The other one is going to be a community forum on the overrides to get more granular. Select board can answer questions on the implications of the overrides and really have a back and forth between the select board just on that subject and the budget as well. And I think we'll probably have some other stuff on the agenda item, and that is on the 6th. Prior to town meeting, we just want to, give everyone an opportunity to have a discussion in an open format and hopefully reduce the amount of misunderstanding out in the community prior to town meeting so that we don't have to go to it.
Yeah, so Ryan, isn't there going to be a candidates night too?
That also, I believe, is going to be scheduled, the candidates night, but the election's not until the 21st
I know.
June. You know very well, counting the days. And
Oh, I'm
so I
not.
did hear that there's going to be a candidates night. I don't know when that date is, but that's after town meeting, I believe.
Yeah, because suddenly we have 3 candidates.
Well, even if there was just 2
Yes.
in one seat.
Yes.
That was all.
Can we go, please?
Yep. So I move to adjourn.
Helen, second.
Michael, aye.
Roll call vote.
Oh,
Guys, wake
well.
up.
Aye.
Barbara, I.
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Ryan, I.
I feel
Helen,
like,
I. Thank you all. Go away
Yeah.
now.
and hey, Rebecca, can we get our plaques? Can we get plaques made?
Did you used to have them?
Yeah, well, they're still somewhere, I think. Everyone has their name in front of them.
Yeah.
They're not there.
Well, we gotta order a
Oh,
new
is
one.
this law? 'Cause it was
We don't have to
on
say
there.
our name before we vote if the plaques are there.
But you know why
Plaques for
it's
the
good to
front?
You
keep
just
doing
say-
that, Mike?
Why?
Because when